Now, mistakes, they happen, and that's fine. I mean, it's a simple fact of life. How we react to those mistakes can be a good indicator as to what type of person we are, or maybe what type of organization we are working with. If, for example, TrekCulture were to say that Star Trek was awful and should be taken off the air immediately, then that would be a mistake. And if we were to continue saying that, then you would be at full rights to start a galactic level war with us. But hey, we don't. We love Trek. But no one is immune to mistakes, least of all the many writers and producers on Trek. From the original series right up to Discovery, Picard and Lower Decks, very questionable decisions have managed to sneak their way through various editors and directors. This has resulted in things ending up on screen when really it would be simpler for them to have been, well, chucked in the bin. This list doesn't cover every mistake that's been made because, well, too many innit? But it does cover quite a few of them. So let's do it. Once again, I'm Marcus Bronzy, and here are 10 of the biggest behind-the-scenes Star Trek mistakes that have happened so far. Number 10. Warp Threshold. Let there be no mistaking this. Threshold really is that bad. The idea for the episode came from the then head of New Line Cinema, Michael DeLuca. Brannon Braga wrote the episode with Robert Duncan McNeill being shocked by the first edit. He was stunned that they were actually going to film this. The idea behind the episode was to challenge a core rule that Gene Roddenberry had established. What would happen if we broke the Warp 10 barrier? What would it lead to? Braga hoped an interesting discussion on the nature of evolution would pursue, but instead, after Tom Paris succeeded in breaking the barrier, he and Janeway ended up evolving into some salamander-type creatures, and did they sexy time? They sexy time, didn't they? Anyway, they turned into some salamander-type creatures, which was Braga's way of showing that evolution does not always travel upward. However, in the editing room, that explanation was lost. One bright spot on this dark and dreary tale is, despite the nonsense that he had to take part in, Robert Duncan McNeill delivers a compelling performance as a man who is losing himself. Number 9. Changing Savick. This is not a critique of Robin Curtis's portrayal of the Lieutenant Savick, but rather at the curious choice to retcon what was an essential element of her character between films. Though there were many drafts of the script for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, one of the earliest introduced Savick, originally named Wix, a male Vulcan, later lengthened to Savick. This half-Romulan, half-Vulcan female officer was shown to be more emotional than other Vulcan counterparts. There was a lot of uncertainty around the character, which was intriguing to say the least. Kirstie Alley was very well received by audiences for her portrayal of Savick, but though she did not return for Star Trek III because of money issues, Robin Curtis took over the role and the half-Romulan aspect of the character was dropped, making Savick a full-blooded Vulcan. This totally flattened the character of Savick. The only true tender emotional sheen that she really got was the Pon Farr scene with young Spock, and audiences were left scratching their heads as to why Savick, so emotional for a Vulcan in the previous film, was suddenly a colder, more 2D version of herself. Number 8. The network rejected The Cage. While it is no secret that The Cage, the first pilot of Star Trek, was filmed in 1965 and starring Jeffrey Hunter, Leonard Nimoy and Majel Barrett, was rejected by the network, this is actually a huge deal as it had massive ramifications for the franchise and the network. Whilst Captain Kirk and the gang cemented the show with the iconic status of their 5-year mission, the rejection of the original pilot was at least in part a dreadful misstep on behalf of the producers. It meant the loss of number 1, a female executive officer who was already a trailblazer in that first hour. While Star Trek would thankfully retain strong female role models, the loss of Majel Barrett as first officer was a blow. Plus, what if they cancelled this first pilot and they never made the second one? Breathe. I don't even want to go there because, well, we wouldn't be here. At the time, no one could have predicted the popularity of Star Trek and what it would become. This rejection would have killed the idea on the spot. Thankfully though, because of this mistake, a second pilot was commissioned and we were given the gift that is Star Trek as we know it. Number 7. Enterprise. AKA, let's make a prequel sequence, let's keep hinting at time travel, and then let's go nowhere. The temporal Cold War, as cool as it sounds, was an element of Enterprise that truly could have been gold. However, the story was hampered by the fact that it was meandering and often pointless. The Suliban, another one of those species that were kind of forgotten by Starfleet, well, until Lower Decks that is, were an interesting addition to the franchise. But then they also turned into a bit of a damp squib. The temporal Cold War was an addition to Star Trek at the request of the studio. Rarely, when the studio requests something, is that a good thing. Brennan Braga admits that it was a chance to be a good idea, developing a backstory to the fighting, yet also admits that within the constraints of the series, it was somewhat lost. In season 4, showrunner Manny Koto wrapped up the storyline in the first 2 episodes, Stormfront. That was because he didn't feel there was anything left to say about the plot, and actor John Billingsley concurred, adding that he felt that Paramount Studios had dictated this move and it didn't work. Overall, it was an idea that sounded really cool, temporal Cold War, but the execution left a stain on the Enterprise's first few seasons. Number 6. Doctor, you are fired! Just for a little bit though. Introduce a teenage character to appeal to younger viewers and then fire his mum for a year. That is what's happened on The Next Generation when Will Wheaton was introduced at Encounter at Farpoint as a bridge for younger viewers to come on board with the whole Star Trek thing. He was Wesley Crusher, the son of Dr. Beverly Crusher, the Enterprise's chief medical officer and friend of El Capitan Picard. He was also a tad annoying, but producer Maurice Hurley was fine with Wesley. It was Dr. Crusher that was the problem. Even though she was the 3rd most popular character in the show, Hurley hated her and her character to the point where he managed to convince Gene to let her go. The cast was stunned and McFadden believed she had been let go because she'd been vocally critical of several of the behind-the-scenes decisions. However, in an oddly lucky set of events, Diana Muldaur was not as popular as the thinly rewritten Dr. Pulaski, and Hurley left at the end of the show's 2nd season. Hurley going out meant McFadden came right back, and thank goodness for that. Number 5. Repetition. Repeating what worked on Deep Space Nine ended up causing a lot of hurt on Star Trek Voyager. When the ratings had begun to slip on Deep Space Nine, the producers decided to introduce the character of Worf to the station's roster. This worked great because Worf was loved from TNG and it boosted the ratings, also allowed Michael Dorn to become a true part of a cracking ensemble, showing more depth to his character than ever before. Worf worked perfectly within the show, thanks in equal parts to his great acting and also great writing. Over on Star Trek Voyager though, the 3rd season faced a similar issue of slipping ratings, and the decision to simply repeat what had worked on Deep Space Nine, which was introduce a new character, was reached. But Worf, well, he was light years away and no amount of wormholeage and time travel could have him in 2 places at once without screwing the whole franchise. Thus, 7 of 9 was created as a character, and Jennifer Lien was dropped from the show. This was the beginning of the issues. Firstly, Lien had been greatly liked by the rest of the cast, so their backs were up when this happened. Then Jerry Ryan was slipped in as 7 of 9. Whilst Ryan was a fantastic addition to the show on screen, there were deep divisions behind the scenes from this shake-up. Whilst the show would last another 4 seasons, it's only in relatively recent years that any sort of camaraderie seems to have been built up between the actors themselves. Number 4. Enterprise. Credits. I got fame. All of these years later, and it's still hard to find a little faith with the heart. I mean, look, there's not a lot to say that hasn't been said already about this entry. Each Star Trek series has their own set of usually wonderful opening credits. The original series theme is iconic, and the Star Trek march that Jerry Goldsmith composed works wonderfully for The Next Generation. Dennis McCarthy's offering for Deep Space Nine was Emmy Award winning, while returning Jerry Goldsmith composed what is potentially one of the most beautiful of them all with the Voyager theme. Flash forward, and Jeff Russo's themes for both Discovery and Picard follow the traditional orchestral molds, whilst Lower Decks, well, it employs some of the same retro music that accompanied the original animated series. Then there's Enterprise, Faith of the Heart. Whilst enjoying something of a renaissance now, and well, personally, I like it, it was still a weird choice for a Trek show. There was a composition called Archer's Theme that would have been the easy correct choice for the opening credits, but instead they went with something a little bit different. And it was the first show to be cancelled since the 60s. It's a bit much to blame it on the theme, but coincidence? I think not. Number 3. Remaking Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan when they really did not have to. From the movie franchise, there are several of the films that stand out above the rest. Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan is up there. So when the film was effectively remade in the form of Star Trek Into Darkness, it felt particularly sour to moviegoers, not least because of the sheer amount of denying it was going to be what it ended up becoming, a poor remake. I mean, Benedict Cumberbatch is a compelling villain here, but it's blatantly obvious that he is Khan. And when it's later confirmed that he is, in fact, the genetically engineered tyrant, it's treated with such wonder that it's a surprise that the film doesn't stop mid-scene simply to just point a massive arrow saying Khan, 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 just to make sure you get the point. Star Trek Into Darkness feels like it's a film made by committee, dedicated only to hitting buzzwords and never really searching for a coherent script. Number 2. Almost every decision that was made about T'Pol's character in the first season of Enterprise. T'Pol was created to be the Spock to Archer's Kirk, though from the very beginning it was very clear that behind the scenes the writers didn't really know what they wanted her to be. At best, she was a body with a brain, by which I mean that for almost every intellectual point that they wrote to come out of her mouth, Jolene Blalock was written into another decontamination sequence. The producers wanted another hit character like Seven of Nine, but early on they spent more time trying to put her in situations where she was shown off for her figure rather than her skills, a disservice to both Blalock and the character of T'Pol herself. Number 1. Shaving the Klingons. The first season of Star Trek Discovery was a mixed affair, as it is when you launch a new series. I mean, there were production issues, behind the scenes issues that caused delays, issues with shooting, issues with scripting, issues with personnel changes. Couple this with the initially bizarre decision to introduce Spock's half-sister in a move clearly designed to grab ratings, and the new show was a bit wobbly. Then, a production image seeped onto the internet. Demon-like creatures were sat around a lunch table taking a break from filming. They looked fierce, they looked terrifying, they looked like a new species. And then a dreadful rumor got out there. These were not new inventions for the series. These were in fact Klingons. The Klingons have evolved over the years, that's cool. In the original series, they were just white guys with a bit of a tan, fluffy eyebrows and goatees, basically. So a change of image wasn't the worst decision that producers made, but rather than a slight deviation from the Worf-like Klingon that we know and love that worked amazingly over all these years, these new guys were jacked up on steroids, protein and plasticine. Nothing like the honorable warriors already established in the franchise. The show's second season worked to redeem their image somewhat, but it's clear that the decision to redesign them so drastically came from a board meeting where not enough people had the power to say no.
We as audiences only get to see the final products of our favorite shows like Star Trek, but there are tons of unknown moments and techniques that contributed to making the shows and films that we adore. This list will be looking at uncovered secrets from behind-the-scenes productions of Star Trek revealed through interviews, books, and documentaries with cast and crew members. Some of these reveals make you rethink entire storylines, but others are just fun trivia. With that being said, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and here are 10 obscure Star Trek secrets that took years to discover. Number 10. The theme song's lyrics. The original series theme song, composed by Alexander Courage, is one of the best in Trek. It's fast-paced, fun, and otherworldly, totally perfect for the show. However, many don't know that the theme song actually has lyrics, not only the voiceover of Captain Kirk, but actual lyrics. Gene Roddenberry wrote these lyrics in order to legally receive 50% of the royalties for the song, despite the fact that the lyrics were never used. He was actually pretty unapologetic about this fact, stating, "I have to get money somewhere. I'm sure not gonna get it out of the profits of Star Trek." The lyrics were hastily written, as they were never actually intended to be used, but seemed to be framed from the perspective of Kirk's long-lost lover he left on Earth to explore the stars. The story was mentioned in the reference book Inside Star Trek: The Real Story, published in 1997. Number 9. The arguments over the Dominion War. Nowadays, the Dominion War is considered to be one of the most exciting time periods in Star Trek history by many fans of Deep Space Nine, but the writers, Ira Steven Behr and Ronald D. Moore, had to fight hard to include it in the show. Early on, executive producer Rick Berman wanted the Dominion War to be over within 3 to 4 episodes at most. Berman thought that the drawn-out war arc would be too depressing and violent for Star Trek, but Moore rebutted, telling him that wars are supposed to be depressing and violent. But what was most upsetting to Berman was his belief that the war storyline went against Gene Roddenberry's vision for the franchise he created, specifically his strong desire to keep the stories optimistic and for Star Trek to be a hopeful look at what the future could be like if we did things right. Nobody can know what Gene would think of the Dominion War, as he passed away before the series began, but his former wife, Majel Barrett, criticized the arc in a letter written to Star Trek magazine, claiming that Gene would never have approved. During an AOL chat in 1999, Berman spoke about how he agreed with Barrett that Gene probably wouldn't have loved the Dominion War, but said that he was now happy with how it had turned out. Number 8. The rebooted Gorn. The merciless reptilian hunters known as the Gorn have only appeared in Star Trek a few times, but whenever they show up, they've proven to be a worthy adversary for the Federation. The Gorn first appeared in the classic original series episode Arena, in a sadly dated costume that didn't do much to sell them as a legitimate threat, though the costume was impressive for the time. But still, the Gorn, a reptilian race stronger than humans, were compelling enough that the writers decided to bring one back in Star Trek Enterprise, which somehow managed to look worse. The early CGI work was, again, impressive for the time, but absolutely hilarious in retrospect. However, many fans don't know that another reboot of the Gorn was planned for Trek, specifically for the 2009 reboot film. According to Star Trek's magazine special in 2014, the Gorn were designed by Barney Berman and his company, the Proteus Makeup FX team, to appear in a scene at the Rora Penthe prison colony. The scene was eventually cut, so sadly we never got to see the full updated look of this new Gorn. Finally, over a decade later, the Gorn returned in the Lower Decks episode Veritas, looking like a cartoonish version of their original design. And we also got the Strange New Worlds episode All Those Who Wander. The Gorn in that episode were younglings, seen battling to the death to decide who's the alpha, and their design greatly resembled the velociraptor-like appearance of the Enterprise Gorn, albeit with much more convincing lighting and movement. After the disappointment of not seeing the Gorn at all when they returned in Memento Mori, this was a very welcomed callback. Number 7. Garak's secret love for Bashir. Unfortunately, good LGBTQ+ representation was very difficult to get past media executives when Deep Space Nine was airing because many in charge feared the backlash it would generate. This is why, despite Andrew Robinson, the actor who played Garak, and the writers both wanting Garak to be portrayed as queer, we never saw it on screen. However, Andrew Robinson did state that his iconic performance of Garak on the show was inspired by queer culture, and that he actively tried to portray him crushing on Dr. Bashir, which really does clear a lot up in retrospect. He confirmed the latter explicitly in the Deep Space Nine documentary What We Left Behind, stating, "At first he just wanted to have sex with him. That's absolutely clear." He also said in the past, "I started out playing Garak as someone who doesn't have a defined sexuality. He's not gay, he's not straight, it's a non-issue for him." So while it took far too long for Star Trek to include its first LGBTQ+ characters, it's interesting to speculate on whether Garak truly did have these deeper feelings for Bashir, as Robinson claimed. Number 6. The original plans for the Borg. As most fans know, the Borg were introduced in the Next Generation episode Q Who, in which Q transported the Enterprise D into Borg space to give humanity a taste of what horrors awaited them in deep space. However, less people are aware that the Borg were actually planned to be introduced several episodes prior in the Neutral Zone. In the episode, Starfleet and the Romulans were investigating their colonies that were destroyed near the Neutral Zone. We never learned who destroyed these colonies, but when the Enterprise D entered Borg space in Q Who, scans revealed that a planet destroyed by the Borg was destroyed in exactly the same manner as the Neutral Zone colonies. Star Trek The Next Generation companion reference books explain that the Borg were originally planned to appear in this episode, kickstarting a 3-episode trilogy in which the Borg would be introduced as the new main enemy of the Federation, prompting the Romulans to join forces with them to save the entire Alpha Quadrant. The book goes on to explain that these plans were postponed and then later changed due to a writer's strike in 1988. Number 5. The reason for the Next Generation's uniform redesign. Star Trek's Next Generation uniforms were redesigned in the 3rd season, changed from the tight-fitting one-piece style jumpsuit into a more comfortable 2-piece collared jacket and pants combination. A look that more fans would prefer, as it just looks more comfortable and more like something that people would actually want to wear into work every day. According to Patrick Stewart in many interviews over the years, the old uniforms didn't just look uncomfortable, they were actually causing him severe back pain. He even said in an interview with BBC Radio 1 that there were talks of a possible lawsuit if the uniforms weren't fixed. Some cast members even stated that the material of the old uniforms was causing them to overheat under the studio lights. The new uniforms, designed by the show's new costume designer Robert Blackman, not only looked way better, but were also way more comfortable for the cast. Number 4. The reason Nichelle Nichols decided to stay. Nichelle Nichols had to deal with a lot of racist harassment during the first season of the original series, and later even learned that studio executives were hiding her fan mail. Nichols justifiably wanted to leave the show at this point, but changed her mind after a chance encounter with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She told Dr. King about her desire to leave the show, but he convinced her to stay, telling her that Uhura was one of the few black characters on television that wasn't stereotyped, and that was treated as an equal on the cast. This random encounter with one of the most influential civil rights leaders in history helped Nichols realize the importance of her role on the show. Nichols didn't publicly recall the story until an interview with the Television Academy Foundation in 2011, in which the story soon went viral. Number 3. The origin of the Constellation class. The Battle, an episode of The Next Generation's first season, introduced us to the USS Stargazer, one of Picard's old ships. The Stargazer was abandoned after a devastating battle against unknown attackers, who were later revealed to be the Ferengi. In the episode, the Ferengi salvage the vessel and use it to lure Picard into a trap as revenge for him killing the Ferengi years ago. However, the ship in this episode was originally supposed to look very different. The book, Star Trek The Next Generation Companion, revealed that the original script described the Stargazer as Constitution class, the same kind of vessel as Kirk's Enterprise. By the time the production team decided to change the model of the ship, they had already filmed several scenes where characters like Wesley and Geordi refer to the ship as a Constitution class vessel. So the actors re-recorded their lines as Constellation class, and the new takes were placed over the old footage. The name Constellation was chosen because it sounded so similar to the word Constitution, so the overdubbing is not super noticeable. But if you look for it, you can still tell that Geordi is definitely saying a Constitution-class starship. Number 2. The argument over the upside-down Enterprise. The original Enterprise went through a lot of changes before the production team finally settled on the classic design that we all know today. Matt Jeffries, the lead designer behind the ship, considered a ring-shaped ship, which later became canonized as the Enterprise XCV-330, and a more familiar design, but with a sphere replacing the saucer. This is also the design that inspired the Daedalus-class ships. Eventually, however, they settled on the shape of the ship, but one of the weirdest arguments between Jeffries and Gene Roddenberry was over the orientation of the model. Star Trek the Magazine Volume 1, Issue 10 included an interview with Matt Jeffries where he recalled showing Roddenberry the model for the first time. He said that the model, unbalanced due to its weird shape, flopped upside down from the strings it was hanging from. Apparently, Gene loved the look of the Enterprise upside down, and Jeffries had a really difficult time trying to unsell him on it. Jeffries fortunately won the argument in the end because, let's face it, flipped Enterprise just looks really wrong. Number 1. The Enterprise model's bad side. The special effects team behind the original series had to use a lot of strange and creative methods to save money on the show. For example, the main physical model of the original Enterprise was only ever filmed from its right side. This is because the special effects team decided to run electrical wiring along the left side for the lights, and keeping the left side hidden proved to be easier than trying to hide the wiring. The Enterprise was mostly seen from its right side on the show and for promotional photos, but when it needed to be seen from the left side, the video was mirrored and the lettering on the hull was replaced with reverse decals so that the text could be read normally. There's very little information online about the model's left side, but you can find images of the wiring in the reference book To Boldly Go, Rare Photos from the TOS Soundstage Season 2. Additionally, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. acquired the model in 1974, and Margaret Whitecamp, a curator at the museum, talked about the lack of detail on the left side in an interview with the Washington Post in 2017, shortly after the model went through a full restoration at the museum.
They say that sometimes a change is as good as a rest, and these scenes are gonna test that theory. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 Star Trek reshoots that totally changed the ending. Number 10. Star Trek Insurrection, Explosive Ending. Star Trek Insurrection is nowhere near as bad as its reputation would have you believe. For example, while it's often criticised as being an overlong episode of The Next Generation, it's also a comment on the aging cast, the pursuit of unattainable goals, and also offers a scene-stealing performance from F. Murray Abraham. It's Abraham's Ruafo who suffers the most from the reshoots in the film. Originally, his villain would have been confronted by Picard on the Collector, the massive device used to harness the fountain of youth energy from the Baku planet's rings. However, in traditional Starfleet style, Picard would offer the hand of friendship only to be turned away. Ruafo would then ascend into the ring's radiation, finally achieving the youth he so desired before dying. This entire sequence was reshot. In the final version, Picard sets the collector to self-destruct, watch on as Ruafo is consumed by the flames, disappearing in a transporter beam. It is a far colder ending to the film, despite the fire, which is at odds with the tone of the film overall. The original ending is far stronger, with the film ending up a little bit weaker due to its removal. Number 9. Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, Casket and Monologue. Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan famously features the death of beloved fan favourite character Spock. Spoiler, I guess. This plot element had been leaked before the film's release, garnering a negative reaction. However, audiences weren't to know that decisions on the finality of this death had already been made behind the scenes. Leonard Nimoy, despite initially requesting the death, changed his mind, and this led to the inclusion of the remember moment with McCoy. However, that wasn't enough for test audiences. They considered the film's ending to be too dark, despite the hopeful tone of Kirk stating he felt young again by the story's close. Harv Bennett listened, returning then to shoot 2 additional scenes. This included the reveal of Spock's casket on the Genesis planet and a final monologue delivered by Nimoy. The famous "Space, the Final Frontier" lines play out before the closing credits. Combined, these elements effectively guaranteed a return for Spock, thereby ensuring a sequel was on the way. Director Nicholas Meyer was not a fan of these additions at all, but allowed them, believing the film strong enough to withstand them. Number 8. Star Trek Voyager Favourite Son, More Ceremony. Favourite Son is a 3rd season episode of Star Trek Voyager that underwent reshoots during filming. Garrett Wang is front and centre here, as Harry Kim is identified as alien rather than the human male he had always believed himself to be. While it all turns out to be a plot by the Teresians, this brings Voyager to this planet of vampire ladies. Roughly midway through the episode, a ceremonial wedding takes place. As originally filmed, it was a racier affair, which was a bit of a clue toward the episode's ending. Notably, the idea that Kim was only there to have his life force sucked out of him was teased by the way the women in the scene treated the unfortunate man getting married. This was retooled after the dailies came in, and the scene was reshot to make their intentions more ambiguous. It became a scene that was more ceremonial and slightly deeper, with dozens of candles added along with more solemnity. This both made the ending of the episode more of a twist, though also teased that these people needed more than just blood to survive. While the episode was still received poorly, the reshoots certainly went a distance toward making it stronger overall. Number 7. Star Trek Beyond, Commodore Paris. Shura Agadashlu, who is of course now best known for her stellar performance in The Expanse, was added to Star Trek Beyond late in the day. Her scenes as Commodore Paris were slotted into the script almost 5 months after principal photography had wrapped, adding a storyline that saw Captain Kirk seeking a promotion. Without these scenes, Beyond stood as a film that saw the crew of the Enterprise facing another dastardly threat, but without anything particularly extra to it. Kirk simply did the hero's job and went back to work on the Enterprise A at the end of the story. The opening monologue, which saw the man dealing with the monotonous nature of their missions, loses some of its impact. Adding these scenes offered a bit more weight to his journey. Knowing that he was actively seeking reassignment puts a clock over the adventures on the ship without a guarantee that he would be returning for a 4th story. However, by the end of the movie, he turns down the promotion that Paris offers him, a decision she supports entirely. This means that, quite apart from Kirk simply hopping back onto the bridge, his position was clearly understood by his superiors. He had once again proven himself as a captain, and the door was still open to moving up in rank when the time came. Number 6. Star Trek Voyager Caretaker, Bye Bye Bujold. Caretaker features some of the most extensive reshoots in all of Star Trek, which is an achievement considering there were only a few short weeks to master them. The resulting reshoots changed not only the ending of this episode, but the fate of Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek Prodigy. When Genevieve Bujold was cast as Captain Janeway, the producers went straight into filming. She, along with Robert Duncan McNeill and Garrett Wang, began filming much of the pilot early. Though the scenes were solid, Bujold abruptly quit after 2 days. With their lead actress departed, the producers scrambled to find their Janeway. Kate Mulgrew was found, and Star Trek history was made. There is no way to overstate the importance of Mulgrew filming her scenes as Star Trek's first leading female captain. Janeway's speech at the end of Caretaker, describing their new search to get home, is quintessential Voyager and could only have been delivered by Mulgrew. Janeway's relationship with Seven was based on both Mulgrew and Jerry Ryan's contentious but professional relationship off-screen, which leads into Seven's appearance on Star Trek Picard as well. Finally, Star Trek Prodigy features the return of Mulgrew, with that voice welcoming Trekkies of all ages home to the franchise. All of this from reshooting 2 days worth of footage almost 30 years earlier. Number 5. Star Trek V The Final Frontier, No More Rockmen. The climactic battle with God in Star Trek V The Final Frontier originally included several rock henchmen that Kirk, Spock and McCoy would have to fight to escape. These were bulky characters resembling the Excalbians from the Savage Curtain, who would become an imposing threat to overcome. They were, in a word, ridiculous. The budget on the film simply didn't stretch to a believable costume, which looked exactly what it was. styrofoam and rubber suits with cigarette smoke pumped inside to give them a steaming quality. Had they remained in the film, they would have given the impression of a 60s Batman flavour of villain. They were cut all together and the scenes with God were reshot and re-edited. With the Rockmen removed, the climax becomes Kirk, Spock, McCoy and Cybok facing off against George Murdoch's ethereal starship-seeking baddie, followed by its destruction thanks to the timely intervention of a Klingon bird of prey. Star Trek V is never going to reach any fan's top 3 Star Trek films list, yet it does have its charms, not least for the fact that it looks like it was made on a wing and a prayer, but there's also the, well, it's better than it could have been element to it as well. Number 4. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Facets. Brooks is too creepy. The 3rd season episode of Deep Space Nine, Facets, sees Jadzia Dax recruit her friends to act as temporary hosts for the previous incarnations of the Dax symbiote. While most of these lead directly into comedy, there is one host who is about as far away from comedy as it's possible to get. Commander Sisko takes on the guise of Duran Dax, the unstable murderer who had been hidden from Jadzia's memories previously. Though confined to a holding cell for everyone's protection, Duran proves adept enough at psychological intimidation that the force field barely stops him. Avery Brooks took the brief, crazy guy is mean, and ran with it. His first delivery was deemed to be far too creepy by the producers, who felt that the episode's ending would taint the way audiences perceived the man. The dialogue was strong enough without adding the psychotic element, so they elected to reshoot these scenes. Brooks was instructed to dial back his performance, who was then able to deliver the scenes that ultimately ended up in the episode. This, combined with Sisko and Dax's small laugh at the end, allowed the two of them to go on being friends by the end, and ultimately wiped away the fears that an unsympathetic character would be left in charge of the station. Number 3. Star Trek The Motion Picture, Spock's Spacewalk. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, Spock arrives on the Enterprise having attempted the Kolinar ceremony. This is aimed at purging all emotion, though the vast consciousness of V'ger overcomes him, leading him to leave Vulcan and return to service. For much of the film's runtime, Spock is cold and distant to his crewmates. This changes after his spacewalk scene, wherein he encounters the heart of V'ger. The original version of the scene paints V'ger in a far more villainous light than the audience actually received in the final ending. Kirk, fearing for his friend, follows him out, only to be attacked by the various elements of V'ger's sensor probes. This version of the scene was deemed problematic, and it was reshot to what finally appears in the film. This then serves the dual purpose of helping the film's pacing and removing some of V'ger's villainy. Subsequently, the finale, which sees V'ger merge with Decker, becomes a more wondrous moment, the two beings evolving together, than a human triumph over a cold machine, and the film is far better for it. Number 2. Star Trek The Next Generation, The Most Toys, A New Fajo. British actor David Rappaport had been cast as Kivas Fajo in Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Most Toys. Rappaport had a smaller stature than many of the other actors in the episode, which had inspired director Timothy Bond to consider building smaller scale sets for his ship, the Jovis. This would have given him the sense of a kind of bullying power, as all the characters around him would have to stoop. However, after filming had commenced, but before these sets were built, Rappaport attempted to die by suicide. It was clear that he couldn't continue filming, so the role was recast. Bond's friend Saul Rubinek was quickly cast in the part, mostly as a favour. This eliminated the need for smaller sets, as he was closer in height to Brent Spiner. It also inspired a further change in the character, leading to the infamous final scene. While Rappaport carried his weapon constantly in the earlier scenes, Rubinek's Fajo was depicted as less trigger-happy. This made the brutal murder of Varia all the more shocking, leading directly to Data's decision to fire at him. Though the reshoots were necessitated by tragic circumstances, they had an undeniably positive effect on the ending overall. Number 1. Star Trek Generations, Kirk's death. When Star Trek Generations was first filming, the ending that was planned was quite different from the one that audiences eventually saw in the theatre. Most of the elements were the same. Kirk returns from the Nexus to help Picard battle Sauron, but the outcome of the fight changed. Rather than fall down the mountainside on the bridge, Kirk was shot in the back by Sauron. This ending, while securing Sauron's villainary status, didn't sit well with test audiences. There was something in the fact that the great Captain Kirk was more obviously murdered by the mad scientist that made it a more bitter pill to swallow. This feedback was taken on board and the ending was reshot. Now, Kirk was simply on board the rickety bridge, which finally collapsed, sending the man plummeting to his death at the bottom of a ravine. While this allowed for the brief but beautiful moment between Kirk and Picard, it was still a little underwhelming for audiences. Time has been kind to Generations, which has received something of a reappraisal in recent years. Still, when all is said and done, that scene of Picard building a cairn for his predecessor packs a punch to this day.
There's an old saying in the creative arts that you should always write what you know. That might seem to be an odd lesson to apply to Star Trek, but whilst the setting might not be grounded in our own reality, that doesn't mean the characters can't be. Thus, there are countless three-dimensional heroes and also villains in the Star Trek franchise, and more than a few of them owe their brilliance to the extraordinary lives of the actors that played them. My name is Marcus Bronzy, this is TrekCulture, and here are 10 behind-the-scenes reasons for Star Trek character quirks. Number 10. Sulu wields a rapier. Now, The Naked Time was an early episode from the original series, which centered on a virus that makes those infected act drunk. And yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. And also, if it's ringing a bell for you, that's because the idea was kind of copied wholesale for the Next Generation's third episode, The Naked Now, where Tasha Yar and Data, well, he's anatomically and she's... Anyway, back to the original series. Despite how absurd this all is, George Takei is incredible here. He was approached early into filming by director Mark Daniels, who informed him that Sulu would be removing his shirt and going absolutely berserk. In addition to this, he would wield either a samurai sword or a fencing foil. Takei asked him to select the latter, citing that his reason was that a samurai sword might be more culturally appropriate then, but by the 23rd century, a man should be free to pick his hobby regardless of his ethnicity. For the next 3 days, Takei spent all of his free time practicing with the weapon and doing as many push-ups as possible. He recalled an incident where James Doohan was nearly found skewered by his rapier because he stepped around the corner at the wrong moment. Apparently, this story spread across the lot, and the fear in Shatner's eyes was very real during their showdown on the bridge. Number 9. Nichelle Nichols was a talented singer. The fan dance scene in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier is one of the most recognized moments in all of its movies. However, its influence has gone even further than that, with it getting parodied on the Lower Decks and Nichelle Nichols making fun of herself in Futurama. But what gets forgotten is that scene came about initially to showcase Nichols' voice and her musical talent. This was not the first time that the audience had heard Uhura sing, because Nichols, a talented musician, had sung on the original series as well, so she was delighted when she learned that this skill would be returning for Star Trek V. She recorded The Moon's a Window for Heaven and performed the infamous scene, only to be devastated to discover that she was overdubbed in post-production. The version heard in the film was performed by a band called Hiroshima, and without her knowledge or permission. Whilst the scene was inspired by the fact that she was more than capable of singing to seduce, Nichols was pretty angered, and it hurt that it was only her image shown in the final scene. If someone can get the recording of Nichelle singing, please let us know in the comments. I would love to listen to that. Number 8. Garak is claustrophobic. By Inferno's Light and After Image both show Garak's extreme claustrophobia on screen. His role in the first episode was based on Charles Bronson's character in The Great Escape, though actor Andrew Robinson brought a lot of himself to the scene. Whilst Garak was written as a claustrophobic regardless, Robinson also suffers from the condition, which led to a hyper-real portrayal. He was also suffering from the flu on the day of filming, which heightened the depiction of discomfort whilst he was trapped in the wall. Robinson, quoted in the Deep Space Nine companion book, described the episode by saying he didn't have to act because it was all incredibly real to him. In After Image, this is used as one of Garak's major weaknesses, thanks to the increasing pressure of his responsibilities during the Dominion War. In the story, he works through his claustrophobia with Ezri Dax, but in real life, Robinson stated that having to go to that place is always tough. Despite this, both By Inferno's Light and After Image are excellent examples of an actor's real-life struggles improving the on-screen performance. Number 7. Hands on hips. In Star Trek Voyager's third season, the episode Macrocosm features an alien race called the Tak-Tak. The entire reason that they were conceived was due to an in-joke on set with Kate Mulgrew, who, while playing Captain Janeway, would often compulsively put her hands on her hips. It became a recurring stance for the character during the run of the show, and it also allowed the writers to have a bit of fun at her expense. The Tak-Tak race were primarily obsessed with body language and gestures to denote meaning. Neelix, thoroughly prepared for negotiations, spends the opening moments of the episode doing his best to apologize for Janeway's incredible faux pas. Placing hands on one's hips is the worst kind of offense in the Tak-Tak language, resulting in an almost immediate cease of the talks. If it wasn't for Neelix, there's very little doubt that Starfleet would not have gained an ally that day. Although this would not be the end of her placing her hands on her hips, it shone a light on the gesture going forward, bringing the audience in on the joke. Number 6. Martok can never forgive Kor. J.G. Hertzler had auditioned for just about every alien role in Star Trek before he was invited to come and read for Martok. He decided he was going to switch things up a little bit for this audition though. He delivered a quiet and controlled performance as the Klingon instead of the wild, aggressive, kapla types that he was sure that producers had seen 1,000 times before. They responded by saying, "Hey, that was a great performance, but can we have a little bit more wild and aggressive and classically kapla type Klingon performance?" Once he showed that he could do that as well, they saw his full range, and guess what? He was hired. In the 7th season, Martok was well established in Deep Space Nine and a fiercely honourable man. However, when Kor boards his ship, a new side of Martok is revealed. Suddenly, he seems to have a petty hatred for this older man. The writers decided that Kor would have blocked Martok's ascent through the ranks early on in his life, which left the man with a deep resentment. Hertzler felt that this wasn't enough though. He asked to include a line that gave Martok greater depth. After telling Worf that he had earned a battlefield commission, he added, "Unfortunately, my father did not live to see that day." This changes the whole situation. Rather than Martok's anger and hurt stemming from purely personal feelings of betrayal, his anger toward Kor stems from his inability to prove his worth to his father before he passed to Sto-vo-kor. This was a small change, but the addition of the line gave the two men a much deeper divide. Number 5, the Cardassian neck trick. The origin story. The Wounded introduced audiences to the Cardassians, who along with the Borg would go on to become one of the primary antagonists in the Trek universe. Mark Eleimo stars as Gul Macet, the first soldier that the Federation encounters during the Next Generation. He sports a distinctive makeup designed entirely around his physique. Eleimo has a very long neck, one that makeup artist Michael Westmore used as inspiration for the race as a whole. He designed the neck ridges that ran from the base of his skull sweeping down and out towards his shoulders, and every Cardassian since has featured the same look. When Deep Space Nine rolled around and built the Cardassians into the very premise, they brought Eleimo back and recast him as Gul Dukat. Beyond the look of the Cardassians in general, his style of speech played into how Dukat was written, with his slow, methodical tone commanding any other character in the scene to operate at his pace. This one man alone was responsible for the overall depiction of the entire Cardassian race simply because he spoke slowly and had a long neck. Number 4, Scotty's right hand. In the original series and most of the TOS era movies, Scotty rarely allows his right hand to be in frame. His left hand features prominently in almost all shots, as James Doohan did not want to display his other. He had served during the Allied invasion of Normandy on D-Day, and during combat, his right middle finger had been severed. Although there are scenes in the early years where for some reason or another his hand manages to slip into frame, it would not be until Star Trek V: The Final Frontier that Doohan seemed to relax his attempts to conceal it. Whilst he stands with Uhura on the bridge discussing shore leave and about to tuck into lunch of rations, his right hand is clearly visible, missing finger and all. Though up to this point he had mostly used hand doubles during filming, there was a scene in Trouble with Tribbles where the missing digit was noticeable while Scotty held a huge armful of tribbles. In the Next Generation episode Relics, he also doesn't try to hide it while sharing a drink with our good old Picard on the holodeck. Number 3. Nimoy paid attention in the temple. The famous Vulcan salute first appeared in Star Trek in 1967 episode Amok Time. This served as the episode that introduced many different aspects of the Vulcan society and revealed that once every 7 years, Spock is DTF. Leonard Nimoy was the one who suggested this gesture. In his 1975 autobiography, I Am Not Spock, he wrote that he based it on the priestly blessing performed by the Jewish Kohanim, with both hands thumb to thumb in this same position, representing the Hebrew letter Shin, which has 3 upward strokes, similar to the position of the thumb and fingers in the gesture. Now, Nimoy said that as a child, he had opened his eyes during a part of the ceremony that was meant to be heard and not seen. During this, he observed this blessing and it stuck with him. The gesture is now one of the most famous in all of pop culture, with live long and prosper being spoken as either a greeting or a farewell, and the less common peace and long life can be used as either a precursor or a response. Number 2, Frakes did his back in and the leg lift was born. I don't care what you say, this, and this is the original Riker maneuver. Jonathan Frakes asserts his dominance over almost every chair he encounters in Star Trek. But far from the mean bait this might feel like, this was actually due to a real-life issue that has followed him for most of his life. Will Wheaton confirmed this on a Reddit thread that a back injury was the cause of Frakes' iconic leg lift and leans. Frakes sustained an injury prior to his casting on Star Trek when his job moving furniture resulted in damaging his back. This meant that he struggled with standing for long periods of time, which would then in turn lead to a slight lean to the left. Riker is also well known for resting his leg against consoles and the odd rock if he can find one as well, which was Frakes' way of taking some of the pressure off. But his interactions with Starfleet's various chairs is what has stuck long in the memory of the show's fans. And thanks to this man, I will never, ever mount a chair in the same way again. Number 1. A very English, very bald Frenchman. Captain Picard was based on Horatio Hornblower, one of Gene Roddenberry's favourite characters. Picard was going to be swashbuckling, though not nearly as much as James T. Kirk was designed to be, and he was going to be virile, young, and definitely, most definitely, French. At 47 years old, Patrick Stewart was the absolute opposite to Roddenberry's idea of the character. His first issue with the actor was his baldness, and after their initial meeting, Roddenberry bid him goodbye, closed the door, and announced to Robert Justman, "I just won't have him." It took the combined team of Justman and Rick Berman to convince Roddenberry to take a chance on him. He was eventually invited back with the stipulation that he wear a wig for the audition, and it went well enough for him to land the part. Mercifully though, Roddenberry eventually changed his mind about the toupee, stating to a reporter that by the 24th century, nobody would care. This left one other issue. Picard was French, and Stewart was clearly not. Thus, there exists a tape in the bowels of Paramount of Patrick Stewart attempting a line in a French accent. At this point, Roddenberry threw his hands up and said, "Just do it in your normal voice," switching the character from a Frenchman with a full head of hair to a man with an English accent with French origins who was as bald as an egg. And I wouldn't have it any other way. To anyone watching, particularly those who have worked in any production or in film or stage or television, you will understand the importance of keeping costs down. Why blow a ton of money on the backgrounds when it's the writing and the acting that should be taking centre stage, correct? Well, sometimes it really is worth dropping a few extra euros. Wait, did Sean write this? Sometimes it really is worth dropping a few extra pennies on the surrounding actors so that frankly they don't stand out so much. And let's spare a thought for the production teams behind these examples. There is, to be fair, a lot of very savvy examples of how they cleverly reuse bits, and then there's one where they just kind of plonk it in a different direction. But I can't judge though. I've been using this same green screen since 2018. I'm Marcus Bronzy, this is TrekCulture, and this is 10 times they reuse sets in Star Trek and hope you would not notice. Number 10, 10 forward / the President's Office. The cheek, the gall, the gumption, the audacity to think us, the audience, would not notice. I mean, they even left the diagonal paneling on the walls. But anyway, to be fair, we bloody love it here at the TrekCulture Towers because 10 forward is one of our favourite spots. I mean, it was introduced in the Next Generation second season, serving as the base for the lovely Guinan. This was Roddenberry's answer to an Old West saloon, although far less piano playing and more synth-a-hole, which would also serve as a function room when the situation called for it. I mean, I think we all remember Riker hitting that trombone a few times in there. It was a large standing set, so it made sense to try and get as much use out of it as possible. Therefore, when The Undiscovered Country, oh yeah, you'll see that film on this list again, went into production, 10 forward was quickly adopted by the theatrical production. The space setting was swapped out for Paris, and the bright sunshine flowed onto the president's table. In the scenes featuring the discussion of Kirk and McCoy's arrest, this was the setting of the large office, which Starfleet and Federation representatives gather to watch the show trial. It's also where we catch an early glimpse of the beloved Renee Auberjonois, depending on which version of the film you're watching. Number 9, La Sirena / The Shrike. Star Trek Picard's third season served as a bit of a soft reboot to the series, one which had been largely fractured as it was. The first and second seasons saw much of the starship action aboard La Sirena, which was Cristobal Rios' unregistered freighter. La Sirena would appear, albeit briefly, in the third season, now under the command of Raffi Musica. The entire cargo section of La Sirena appeared several more times throughout the series. Captain Vodic obviously had a thing for Rios and Musica's ship. She borrowed the cargo section to transform it into the bridge of her vessel, the Shrike. While the transformation is fairly extensive, there is some positivity to this. The third season of the show clears many of the characters from the first two seasons, but this inclusion of La Sirena could in a way be seen as retaining a little bit of Rios, even if the Shrike is desperately trying to kill our heroes. Number 8. St. Clair/Fairhaven. Star Trek Voyager's fourth season was enormous in terms of scope. It opened with the concluding part of Scorpion before barreling forward into the Year of Hell, which was quite literally a year of hell. Other episodes like Prey saw a large amount of digital work being realized, so the killing game may not have been met with the same enthusiasm granted to other scripts, but it was a big one. The Hirogen were going to take control of Voyager, forcing everyone into holographic death matches. The first part opens with Janeway taking on a Klingon dagger to the chest before suddenly appearing in a French village. This village of St. Clair was filmed on Universal Studios' European Street or Little Europe set, which actually offered the cast and crew a chance to get away from stage work and get to shoot on location. Roxanne Dawson and Jerry Ryan were both very glad for a change of scenery. When it came to Fairhaven, in the show's sixth season, the crew once again returned to Universal Studios. The sets were redressed, though the same physical buildings were used in both. As an Irishman writing this article, however, told you I knew it was Sean. Knew it was Sean. If I was an Irishman, however, the reuse of sets would be the least of Fairhaven's issues. Number 7, Enterprise E Shuttle/Runabout Cockpit. Our recent list on the secrets of the Runabout has covered the multiple times that this durable little ship has been used in Star Trek. It was reconstructed for Deep Space Nine, which needed additional support craft to allow the station's crew to actually trek through the stars. While the Runabout itself would appear in many episodes of the series, it would also pop up in both The Next Generation and Voyager, as well as an animated appearance in Lower Decks. Star Trek Insurrection was released between Deep Space Nine's 6th and 7th seasons. The Enterprise E shuttle, along with the captain's yacht and the mission scout ship, all saw materials carried over from the Runabout set. The shuttle is perhaps the most noticeable, as the layout is almost identical to the older ship. There's even a transporter directly behind the pilot and co-pilot seats, though the colouring is slightly different in the theatrical version. Number 6, Enterprise D Engineering/Enterprise A Engineering. Look, sharing sets between ongoing productions just makes sense from both a financial standpoint but also an aesthetic one. Though the stories may be set in differing points of history, Star Trek has attempted to keep something of a uniform look between Federation starships. Star Trek IV, The Undiscovered Country, borrows rather heavily from The Next Generation, so much so that there are 3 separate entries from the film in this list here. Here, there is the fact that the main engineering set is borrowed wholesale from Enterprise D. Nicholas Meyer does use the space in a clever way though. Rather than filming the core itself as it would be seen in The Next Generation, he aims the camera from the core, looking down on Scotty and the rest of the team. Number 5, Voyager's Sickbay/Enterprise E Sickbay. When it came to introducing a new starship for the 4th live-action Star Trek series, Star Trek Voyager updated some of the designs on the interiors of the Starfleet vessel. The bridge and the engineering sets were revamped, modernized, and made to look as futuristic as mid-90s would allow it. The sickbay set, complete with yellow glowing walls and a new biobed and an office for the chief medical officer, was constructed and proved to be so popular that the production team on Star Trek First Contact said, wait, we're going to be borrowing that for the Enterprise E. First Contact was in production between Voyager's 2nd and 3rd seasons, so the sets were just standing there, not making the production team any money, so they redressed them, repainted them, but they kept them structurally intact so that when the series began production again, they literally transformed them back. Robert Picardo makes a cameo in First Contact as the Enterprise's emergency medical hologram, so one would argue that the team borrowed everything from that stranded ship, including the holograms. Number 4, Enterprise Bridge/Valdor Bridge. Director Stuart Baird may have been named many things by Star Trek fans, but we must say this for the man. He knew how to get the most out of his props and sets. Star Trek Nemesis arrived in 2002 and Voyager had wrapped production, so this meant that sets like Sickbay were no longer available to borrow and thus they had to be built from scratch. Baird ordered the construction of a new bridge set for the Enterprise E. This differed from all previous iterations because it was built on gimbals that shook when needed, which mean the crew could realistically lurch upon weapons fire. I mean, up until this point, they simply would move themselves while the camera was shaken. With such an expensive set having been built, Baird wasn't about to waste a penny of it. He had it redesigned and redressed to serve as the bridge of the Romulan warbird Valdor, in a very similar move to the Wrath of Khan. Other examples of hidden redressing were those freestanding consoles on the Riemann Bridge, nicked from the old Deep Space Nine lockers as they were Cardassian in design. Number 3. Observation Lounge / Dining Room. This is one of the more obvious set redresses on this list, although it is still not the only one to feature in The Next Generation and Undiscovered Country. With the series in full swing at the time of the 6th film's production, it made complete sense that there would be a lot of crossing over, which also sets the stage for the evolution of the Enterprise lineage. Though, of course, the Observation Lounge was constructed for The Next Generation, the redress and transformation to turn it into Enterprise A's dining room was a brilliant and very simple move. Where else would the party dine in such style on a starship? Surely the mess hall would be a bit cramped, and Kirk's headquarters were already depicted as being a far cry from the luxury of Captain Pike's stateroom. If there was one regretful part of that set share, it would be the destruction of that lovely dining room. I mean, the portraits adorning the walls, including the great Sarek himself, were obliterated by a torpedo from General Chang's bird of prey. But at least we were able to put the wall paneling back together again for Picard's next sit-down briefing. Number 2. Federation HQ / the courtroom. Once the USS Discovery warped into the future, Starfleet had to adapt to a new 32nd century setting. Therefore, once the ship arrives at Federation headquarters, the crew and the audience are treated to an astonishing sight. The ship could break into several smaller support craft to aid in evacuation, as was shown in Coming Home. The interior of the vessel was distinctly circular in structure, often comprising of rings around a central hollow space. The look was so distinctive, however, that when it shows up in Strange New Worlds, it is immediately recognizable. The courtroom at Starfleet headquarters, in which Una's trial takes place, is the redress of this set. Much like several other entries on this list, the general shape is what gives it away immediately, though perhaps the biggest clue is the large circular space in the middle of the room. This, having served as a stellar map in Discovery, is now only there to keep witness and prosecution as far away from the judges as possible. Despite its recognizable look, it was still fun to see where the USS Federation took its inspiration from. Number 1. Enterprise Bridge / Reliant Bridge. In a way, this is the ultimate example of hiding something in plain sight. Director Nicholas Meyer joined the Star Trek family with Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The stakes were high. Admiral Kirk and the rest of the crew began to feel quite old, and from the depths of space, a madman sought revenge. However, this madman wasn't just mad. They were cost conscious. First, it would appear as the simulation room during the Kobayashi Maru test. Then it would appear as itself when Lieutenant Savick commanded it out of dry dock. Then, of course, it would serve as the Enterprise bridge for the rest of the film. The bridge also served as the main bridge of the USS Reliant, commanded by Khan Noonien Singh himself. As the hero and villain of the film famously never ever met face to face, this was a clever way to get around the recycling of the set. As an audience, we're paying far more attention to the performances being given rather than the deck plating underneath these actors' feet. Well played, team. Well played.
Cliffhanger endings are an almost sure bet at bringing the audience back the following week. A strong enough cliffhanger will see them rewatch the first part of the story as well, but the perfect cliffhanger will see Riker give Worf the order to fire. When they work, they really work. Writing reasons are the most common reason behind them, but actor disputes and studio interference are surprisingly common reasons as well. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 production secrets behind these Star Trek cliffhangers. 10. The Adversary. The Adversary is a strong season finale, even though it was a last-minute rewrite to close Deep Space Nine's 3rd season. The changeling that infiltrates the USS Defiant warns Odo that his people have already invaded the Alpha Quadrant and that no one knew a thing about it. It's a chilling moment in the show and a dark ending to the 3rd season. The writers, though they hadn't planned on it, ended up crafting the perfect note to leave the audiences on. Paramount Pictures had nixed the idea of having Homefront and Paradise Lost being the bridge between the 3rd and 4th seasons, though the idea of changelings on Earth is present in all 3 stories. It's touched on in Way of the Warrior, with Martok demanding blood screenings before his meeting with Sisko and Kira. There is also a hint of John Carpenter's The Thing on show while the crew conduct their blood tests in the mess hall of the Defiant. The entire episode is a triumph, capturing the paranoia and tension that Homefront and Paradise Lost unfortunately would fail to manage in the middle of the next season. 9. Equinox. Star Trek Voyager's 5th season ends on a dramatic note, with the USS Equinox stealing a modified shield emitter, leaving their sister ship vulnerable. Multiple fissures open, with an alien flying toward and attacking Captain Janeway. It was established that a single touch from one of these aliens could kill, so it doesn't look good for her going into the season break. Kate Mulgrew was struggling with renegotiations of her contract during the season. She had recently married and was seeking additional free time from the producers of the show. Though this was dissimilar to Terry Farrell's attempts to become a recurring star, it rang some of the same bells. At one point, highly frustrated, she announced to a room full of reporters that she hoped Janeway would exit the series in a coffin. If negotiations went south, Janeway would have been killed off in the show, with Chakotay taking over as captain for the remainder of the run. However, the producers capitulated to Mulgrew's demands, which saw Janeway shrug off the alien's killer touch in the opening moments of the 6th season. While this was simply due to her contract being secure, it also went a few steps toward making her character look even tougher on screen. Number 8. Space Nazis? When all else fails, vampire space Nazis should make for an interesting ending. The 3rd season of Enterprise raised the overall quality of the show. The Xindi arc was a daring move by the producers. They introduced a season-long story, which was the first time that Star Trek had committed so many episodes to a single plot thread. The writing became darker and the stories overall became far more intriguing. When the final episode of season, 0 Hour, arrived, there was a problem. Although the show was getting better, the viewers were dropping off. Cancellation seemed imminent. This, Connor Trenier reflected on the Season 4 DVD extras, led to the decision to introduce a very confusing ending to the episode. With the Xindi and the Sphere Builder threats taken care of, Enterprise returns to Earth to find that Starfleet is not responding to any of their hails. Tucker and Mayweather take a shuttle pod to the surface, only to be fired upon by old-style World War II era aircraft. The scene then cuts to a hospital tent where 3 Nazi officers look down at the burnt form of Captain Archer. Out of the dark, a vampiric face looms forward and the episode ends. 0 Hour makes 0 sense on its own. Trenier believed that the ending was included as a warning to the studio. It was so unsatisfying that, if the show was cancelled, fans would blame them for such a wildly left-of-centre plot to be abandoned. The show was renewed for a 4th and final season, one that saw this Nazi threat dealt with in the opening 2-parter. 7. The Jem'Hadar. The 2nd season of Deep Space Nine featured the introduction of the Jem'Hadar, the foot soldiers of the Dominion. The Vorta also make their debut in the form of Eris, though her abilities were not in line with what the species would become. The big shock of the episode was the rapid destruction of the USS Odyssey. The Galaxy-class ship was introduced for one reason. The writers needed the audience to understand the threat of the new villains in Star Trek. The design of the ship was so familiar thanks to the Enterprise D. At one point, the episode was due to feature the Next Generation crew joining forces with the station to fend off the threat, though this was quickly dropped. Robert Hewitt-Wolf, a long-term writer on the series, believed that the name on the ship didn't matter. The visual shock of seeing the main ship of the Next Generation explode was enough to prove to the audience that the Dominion was just as scary as the Borg. The episode, after the crew returns to the Alpha Quadrant, closes on Sisko's pledge to be ready for the first battle with the Dominion. This was a mission statement, and it had also been intended to close the 1st season of the show. 6. The Enterprise arrives. The 1st season of Discovery ended with the introduction of John Eve's beautiful redesign of the USS Enterprise. It swoops into shot and pauses directly ahead of the Crossfield-class ship, taking up the entire screen, before the episode cuts to black and the original series theme plays over the end credits. It was enough to drive the fandom wild, celebrating the return of the Legacy ship and wondering what on earth was actually happening. It was a carefully planned ending, though, one that was effectively a way for the producers to guarantee that audiences would return for a 2nd season. The story behind the 1st season of Discovery is still a little unclear. Brian Fuller was hired and fired before the show was released, with budget reasons being among several cited. Gretchen Berg and Aaron Harbitz would later be fired during the 2nd season. The look and design of the show left many audience members cold, and the frequent downer episodes were described as not Star Trek. In what seems like a case of prophetic planning, the Enterprise had always been planned to arrive for the cliffhanger. This would lock interest, while also teasing audiences as to Discovery's connection to the wider Trek universe. It was both a gamble and a failback. 5. Time's Arrow. The end of the Next Generation's 5th season sees Data's severed head discovered in an old cave under San Francisco. This leads the Enterprise to the Davidian system, where Data is thrown back in time to the 19th century on Earth. By the episode's end, the rest of the senior staff go through a portal in an attempt to find him, which is where the story is put on hold. This was created as a way to remind audiences that the show was definitely coming back for another season. Deep Space Nine was about to launch, and a lot of media attention was focusing on that. Producers worried that the Next Generation would face a viewer drop-off if they didn't give the audience something solid to return for. The entire main cast were stranded in the past, with Data's head seemed to be a fixed point in history. Guinan compelled Picard to go along with the away mission, or the consequences would be dire. Along the way, Samuel Clemens began to realise that something wasn't right with the pale-skinned man in the hotel. The cliffhanger was a triumph, and the audience returned, joining the Enterprise for its final 2 seasons. 4. Homefront and martial law. The grim ending of Homefront, showing Starfleet officers appearing fully armed on the streets of New Orleans, was a misdirect on the part of the producers. They wrote the first part of the episode to build up to an all-out assault on Earth, then revealed in the second part, Paradise Lost, that this was never coming. As an idea, the end of the episode works. However, this cliffhanger is a far cry from what it was supposed to be. Initially, it was designed to be the third season finale, which we addressed earlier on the list. Toward the end of the third season, the producers changed their minds, pushing these episodes out. Then, between the end of season 3 and the beginning of season 4, the showrunners were instructed to do something big, leading to the Way of the Warrior. This robbed Homefront and Paradise Lost of the budget required to execute this plan. Homefront ends with barely 6 or 7 officers standing on the street instead of the dozens of soldiers that had been planned. Paradise Lost didn't fare much better, although the battle with the USS Lakota goes a long way toward raising the visual spectacle. Showrunner Ira Steven Behr lamented how this two-parter ended up, keeping a little post-it on his desk for years that simply read, "Remember Homefront, Paradise Lost." 3. Basics. The second season of Star Trek Voyager came to a close, with the crew marooned on a barren world by the Kazon and Seska, who stole the ship. While Basics would serve as the coda to the Kazon storyline and also become the last main appearance of Martha Hackett as Seska outside of the holodeck or time vortexes, it was at its heart something much simpler. It was a dare by outgoing executive producer Michael Piller to himself. He wanted to see if he could one-up himself after creating the Best of Both Worlds cliffhanger. The idea of having the crew at the mercy of this volcanic world was an instant draw for him, which led to the name of the episode. It was Voyager's people going back to basics, with no advanced technology to help them out. They're also left in a position where they've no hope of retaking the ship, which, for all they know, has flown away for good. The second part of the episode was a strong season opener, delivering on the premise, arguably better than the second part of the Best of Both Worlds did. Voyager's third season saw an overall rise in the quality of the show. 2. Call to Arms. Deep Space Nine's 5th season ending was that fantastic shot of the Joint Federation and Klingon fleets turning to attack the Dominion forces. The shot was incredibly popular with viewers, as it felt like a real rallying cry after the defeat at the station. The problem was that it was not exactly what was written. Ira Steven Behr wanted the last shot to be the Defiant and the Rataran joining the fleet and continuing on their journey. However, the effects house went rogue and had the fleet coming back toward the screen. This didn't match at all with the original opening of the 6th season, A Time to Stand. In a way, this wasn't meant to be a cliffhanger at all. At least, not in the traditional part 1, part 2 sense. This was supposed to leave the show open-ended as to what Sisko would do next. The shot seemed to lock the crew into a huge fight in the next episode. The writers came up with a solution. A Time to Stand opens with a pan through a battered and broken Federation Klingon fleet, suggesting that both forces had their assault crushed. While it was never the original intention, it did serve as a chilling opening to the 6th season. 1. Best of Both Worlds. Locutus of Borg came about from 2 different directions. First, the producers and writers knew that they were bringing the Borg into the next generation. Redemption had originally been slated as the end of the 3rd season and beginning of the 4th, but Best of Both Worlds was pulled forward. A speaker for the Borg was required so that the crew had someone to interact with rather than the bodiless voice of the collective. The second reason for Locutus' creation was a directive from Paramount Pictures itself. Throughout the 3rd season, negotiations between the company and Patrick Stewart had continued to the point where the studio worried that it may never be resolved. Therefore, an ending had to be written that would see Picard removed from the show. The closing moments of the Best of Both Worlds are frequently cited as some of the most tense in television history, along with being one of the greatest cliffhangers ever made. There was such a large degree of honesty in the actors' performances in that scene, as none of them truly knew what the next season was going to bring to the show. Thankfully though, Stewart signed on and Locutus was saved from the collective in the second part of the story. Listen, the truth is, when I start a sentence, my continuity is about as good as... it's about 4:45. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 biggest continuity errors in Star Trek. Number 10. You broke your little ships. Star Trek First Contact. In the scene in Star Trek First Contact that Lily confronts Picard, there plays out a tense yet outstanding exchange that shows the seasoned officer finally losing his cool. Forced into facing the Borg once again, Picard is on the verge of losing the Enterprise E to the cybernetic horrors, driving him up and past the point of obsession. Lily manages to goad him into revealing this, name-dropping Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. Quite apart from reminding the audience of Khan in Star Trek II, it jabs Picard to the point where he roars in her face. After she shouts at him to destroy the damn ship, he flips, swinging his his rifle around in an arc that smashes the display case containing the models of various enterprises. As the rifle hits, it shatters the glass, but it clearly misses impacting any of them. However, in the very next scene, Liddy comments on how he broke his little ships, picking up the cracked remains of the Enterprise D's star drive section, while the saucer of the Enterprise C lies broken beyond it. Now, unless these models are made of spun sugar, there was no reason that such damage should have been done by Picard's outburst. Number 9. Which Geordie is this? Yesterday's Enterprise. In the seminal third season episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Yesterday's Enterprise, the arrival of the Enterprise C creates an alternate reality. This changes several things about the setting and crew that the audience is used to seeing. While the most obvious change is the replacement of Worf with Lieutenant Yar, there is also a subtle change to the uniforms that everyone is wearing. They were upgraded to give the Enterprise D crew a more militaristic feel. The collars are raised slightly higher, utility belts are added to the waist, and black cuffs are added to each of the sleeves. The actual changes aren't really highlighted other than what the audience sees on screen. Perhaps this is why this error slips through. In the final scene of the episode, when everything is supposedly set to rights again, Guinan is in 10 forward. She messages the bridge to see if everything is alright, before smiling, satisfied that all is well. She then sits with Geordi to ask him about Tasha Yar. The error? Geordi is still wearing the uniform that supposedly only existed in the alternate universe, black cuffs and all. Number 8. The knife in Hugh's neck, Nepenthe. Star Trek Picard managed to rub some of the audience up the wrong way in the episode Nepenthe. While the episode overall is a wonderful addition to the franchise, not least in the fact that it shows the return of William Riker and Deanna Troi, but it also gives us some fantastic scenes between Elnor and a returning Hugh. Yet it is in these scenes where the issue lies. Narissa, a Zhat Vash operative stationed aboard the artifact, corners Elnor and Hugh in a corridor. While Elnor is able to fight off her accompanying guards, her skills prove a little too much for him. Distracting Elnor long enough, she pulls out a tiny knife and launches it across the room, right into Hugh's neck. However, there seems to be a little bit of time travel going on here. Hugh is shown to have the knife in place before Narissa releases it from her hand. It is seen hanging down, presumably ready for Jonathan Del Arco to react in the next shot. With the scene making the final cut, however, it stands out in the battle like a sore thumb. Number 7. Colonel Kira's jersey swap-outs, Take Me Out to the Holosuite. Take Me Out to the Holosuite is an early episode in the 7th season of Deep Space Nine, wherein the station's senior staff and Quark, Rom and Lita are challenged to a game of baseball by Captain Solok of the USS Ticumbra. It's played for comedy, with the station personnel being, almost to a person, dreadful at Captain Sisko's favourite sport. Eagle-eyed observers note that while the crew are given fancy jerseys to play in while they take part in the Holosuite, there is a problem with Colonel Kira's jersey. Once the game begins in earnest, her jersey goes through a transformation. At some points, the name on the back reads Kira, which would be in line with Sisko, Dax or Bashir. However, a little later on, the name is suddenly changed to Nerys, which would be like putting Ben, Jake or Ezri there. There's no explanation for this change, other than the fact that the costuming department must have made several different jerseys for Nana Visitor, though clearly someone didn't talk to the rest of the department when they stitched this jersey with her first name. Number 6. Valtain shifts positions, Star Trek 6. Dmitry Valtain served above the USS Excelsior under Captain Sulu. He was present to witness the shockwave that originated from the explosion of the Klingon moon of Praxis. The enormous disturbance battered the ship, sending the crew flying from their seats. Valtain, who was standing beside the captain at the moment of impact, was thrown to the floor. However, the sequence of shots in the undiscovered country don't line up. For example, as Sulu's cup begins to shake with the approach of the shockwave, Valtain is shown directly beside the captain's chair. Then, the scene shifts to a shot of the crew bracing themselves against their workstations, including Valtain, who is now sitting at a console to the side of the bridge. In the next shot, he's back beside the captain's chair again, standing just in time for the energy wave to slam into the vessel and send everyone flying. Once the wave passes and the ship begins to settle, Valtain is shown taking his seat, that same one that he was pictured in before the wave hit. Number 5. Burnham has a death wish. What's past his prologue. Commander Michael Burnham had quite a rocky first season in Star Trek Discovery. She attempts to instigate a mutiny aboard the USS Shenzhou before being quickly tossed in the brig. She escapes, helping her captain until they beam across to a Klingon ship, with Giorgio dying in combat with Takuvma. Burnham is hauled up on charges and booted from Starfleet. One would assume that this would have been a learning curve, so that when she's drafted back into service by Gabriel Lorca, she would be slightly more attentive to what's going on around her. This does not extend to weapons etiquette, apparently. In What's Past His Prologue, Burnham and Lorca go head-to-head in combat. Burnham seems to get the upper hand, pulling her phaser on him. However, he is in no danger. She's holding it backwards with the muzzle pointed at herself. This continuity error was apparently caught in the edit, with a small clicking sound added to the scene to signify Burnham flipping the phaser around and holding it in the right way, as she is shown doing a moment later. Number 4. Where'd the tennis ball go? Features end. In the opening moments of Star Trek Voyager's third season episode Future's End, Captain Janeway chats to Tuvok in the ready room. There, she's holding a tennis racket and a strange version of a tennis ball. It's quite distinctive, with like sucker pads covering the circumference. Once the opening credits roll, she enters the bridge with that ball still in hand. Captain Bracton's time ship exits a singularity, and there follows an exchange that sees Voyager fired upon. For the first few moments, Janeway still has that tennis ball in her hand, using it almost as a prop while speaking to her crew. Then, after a few seconds, the ball is gone, and she's holding the armrests of her chair. Now, the first thought here is that in the heat of the moment she put it away. However, a few frames later, the tennis ball returns to her hand in the exact position it had been, having vanished previously. It's never mentioned, nor is she shown putting it down and picking it up again. It's simply a case of not lining up the shots properly, adding to this continuity error here. Number 3. Which chemosite canister is removed? The shipment. In the third season of Enterprise, the NX-01 begins its hunt for the Xindi. The second season closed with a devastating attack against Earth, leaving millions dead, so the stakes are at their highest here. Following clue after clue, Archer's ship finally makes a significant discovery in the episode The Shipment. Here, they stumble on a set of Xindi Arboreals, who are preparing to ship chemosite to the main weapons facility. Archer and Reed beam into the facility and open the case containing the various canisters for shipping. In the first scene, there are 2 rows of canisters. Reed picks up one from the closer row, leaving 3 canisters between him and the right-hand side of the case. They're disturbed by the approach of the Xindi and shuffle away, revealing that there are now only 2 canisters between the one Reed has taken and the right-hand side of the case. This incongruity between shots is just enough to take the viewer out of the scene. It's entirely possible that Reed replaced the canister and picked up another, yet one has to ask oneself, why? Number 2. Kirk's shirt rips itself. Shore leave. In the first season episode of the original series, Captain Kirk and several crewmen beam down to a planet that effectively serves as the first holodeck in Star Trek. They discover that their thoughts, and indeed dreams, start to come to life on the surface, though sometimes with disastrous effect. McCoy is speared by a Black Knight while another crewman runs afoul of a fighter plane. Kirk runs into his old Academy nemesis Finnegan. It's not the woeful Irish accent that puts this entry here, it's the issue with Kirk's shirt, which is apparently made from wet tissue paper during their fight in the dirt. Finnegan pins Kirk to the ground, though both are left slightly dazed. Kirk's shirt is fully intact. However, in the very next shot, it is torn and hanging from him in scraps. This continuity error has received several comedy sends-up throughout the years, including the Futurama episode Where No Fan Has Gone Before, which depicts Kirk quietly ripping his shirt when he thinks people won't notice, just to get a chance to show off some skin. Respect the hustle, Jim. Number 1. Chekhov's changing wardrobe, Star Trek 3. Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock features, arguably, Commander Pavel Chekhov's greatest crime against fashion in his long service in Starfleet. Yes, it is that collared shirt which is being referred to here. Quite apart from making the man look like he's auditioning for a part in Amish the Musical, it looks truly uncomfortable. It seems that the filmmakers must have realised this midway through filming. When the Enterprise is stolen, he's wearing the fashion disaster. However, when the ship reaches the Mutara sector and enters orbit of the Genesis planet, Chekhov is changed into a plain black undershirt. As he is the only member of the crew to change outfits between scenes, this seems more likely to be a continuity error than a deliberate choice. However, it's not a bad decision by any means. This new shirt, one that will carry over into the voyage home as well, looks infinitely better than the earlier option. Everyone is allowed a bad fashion phase in their lives, but let's hope that this is the worst it ever gets for poor Pavel Chekhov.
Listen guys, making TV, making movies, it's an expensive business. Who's gonna pay for it? Me? No. Unless they gave me a walk-on part, then I'd consider it. But in the meantime, I am Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 times Star Trek reused props to cut corners. Number 10. Bird sculptures keep on appearing. The bird sculptures are among the most reused props in Star Trek The Next Generation, making their debut appearance in Encounter at Farpoint, which is the audience's first clue that they were going to be a mainstay. They're sitting above a plinth in Q's courtroom, and they would return 7 years later in All Good Things. The next time that they were seen, they were in Karras's office in the episode Too Short a Season. This first season episode featured Admiral Mark Jameson, one of Star Trek's many dodgy Starfleet admirals along the way. He takes medicine that allows him to de-age, which is a slightly reworked version of the plot of the counterclock incident from the animated series. This was a case where it wasn't only props getting reused. The sculptures that are seen again in the 5th season, in the episode Unification Part 2, they are table ornaments on the bar in Quailor 2. They are that incredibly robust and handy type of accoutrement to any household decoration really, as the set designers must have felt they belonged in any setting, be it Starfleet, insurrectionists, or courtroom. Number 9. Romulan Warbird becomes Mazarite vessels. Andrew Probert designed the Diderotix-class Romulan warbird for Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1 finale, The Neutral Zone. While the ship would go through a couple of revisions, including one version where the wings were positioned vertically rather than horizontally, the final ship is one of the most recognizable vessels in the franchise. The bird-like wingspan that sits above and below the nacelles is almost triangular with rounded corners. Oddly enough, this design turned up in Enterprise's first season episode Fallen Hero. This was not simply a case of reusing a ship wholesale like the Tellarite vessel, as Doug Drexler discussed at one point. He described speaking to Rob Bonchoon, who was working in the art department on the show, who answered that it wasn't just reusing the warbird. Dan Curry, who was the head of the art department, pulled the top off an AMT model of the ship and ordered the team to design a new ship from the ground up using that piece. Both men agreed it was a bizarre decision, with the design far too obvious. It would appear again in Enterprise in the third season episode, Damage. Number 8. Wall paneling. This wall paneling has been used many times in Star Trek. It contains US Navy sonobuoys, which are used in battle with submarines or occasionally found for sound experiments underwater. They're octagonal in shape, doubling up for many elements of the Star Trek universe. They were built into several wall sections in Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, including a piece of Starfleet Academy that Kirk exits near the beginning of the film. They'd be reused again in the next film, becoming the walls of the transporter room that Uhura takes up her new post in. This looks like a complicated mass of piping and hoses, though in actuality it's a relatively simple mold. They pop up again in Star Trek The Next Generation. The episode Too Short a Season pops up again here, as they become the walls in the underground system of caverns that the criminal Karis is hiding in. They also go on to appear in The High Ground, A Matter of Honor, and Liaisons as well. They effectively became the standard backing panel when sets needed to look alien. Number 7. Klingon wine bottles. This one was a bit of a silly decision on the part of the props department on Enterprise. In the first season episode Rogue Planet, Archer, T'Pol and Tucker meet 3 Eska hunters of this world. While together, they break bread and have a drink. One of them pulls out a bottle and, like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Trekkie sat straight up and pointed. The prop is a reuse of the Klingon blood wine bottle from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It was shown prominently in episodes like The Way of the Warrior, when Worf and his family friend share a few bottles as they reminisce. It was also seen more times throughout the show, including that fateful time that Miles O'Brien decided to draw what was bothering a Worf out of him in Image in the Sand. While the contents of said bottles were probably enough to kill lesser men, i.e. a human who isn't an Irishman, the actual container itself is almost as familiar in Deep Space Nine as the sash that the Klingon officer wears. Seeing it appear in Enterprise felt more than a little wrong, with blood wine not being as readily available at the time. Number 6. Planet Hell. Planet Hell was the nickname for the standing set that would become every alien world from Star Trek The Next Generation onwards. It served as Galorndon Core, Cardassia Prime, AR-558, and many planets besides, molding and adapting to become whatever harsh environment the episode called for. Technically, sets aren't props. For this one, however, an exception is being made because the set itself was the prop. It was designed in such a way that the actors would be able to truly experience the discomfort of each planet, as each actor who stepped foot onto this stage hated their experience there. Rarely, in fact, were the unhappy faces on screen faked in these scenes. It was hot, cramped, and generally full of smoke, making shooting in there a miserable time. They may have had to climb the walls like LeVar Burton in The Enemy, or simply run around them while escaping the Jem'Hadar like Aaron Eisenberg in the Siege of AR-558. They were never used as a locale for the actors to enjoy a bit of downtime, relaxation, and chilling out. As props go, those walls in Planet Hell elicited some of the most realistic reactions of any additional environment to the franchise, so props for that. Number 5. Decorative windows. When it comes to stained glass windows, it's generally easier not to continually order new ones for various scenes. Producing them can be a costly and time-consuming endeavor. That's why this particular entry pops up here. In Enterprise's third season episode Exile, Hoshi stays on a planet in a Beauty and the Beast type situation. The resident alien, Tarkin, attempts to convince Hoshi to stay with him in his beautiful castle, styled in a medieval fashion. Those windows had appeared in Star Trek before. When Picard and Shinzon sit down to dinner in Star Trek Nemesis, they are clearly visible behind the Starfleet captain. The thing with stained glass windows is that they are almost always convey a sense of grandeur to any location, so they truly added to the scene on Romulus. This is heightened when Picard leaves the table to step into the Romulan Senate itself. Both uses of the windows were meant to depict a deeper meaning and presence than there actually had been in the episodes and movies they featured in. In both cases, the windows were a mask for the lies being told by Tarkin and Shinzon. Number 4. Diamond shelving. Star Trek The Next Generation's first season was fiendish for reusing props. There are several entries on this list that feature lamps, desk ornaments, and other bits that continue to pop up, which can be forgiven for the studio mining years of production on the movies in the original series to save a bit of cash where possible for the next show. In We'll Always Have Paris, Picard visits the holodeck as he thinks of Dr. Janice Mannheim, an old fling who was brought back into his life. In the beautiful restaurant, which, in true Hollywood style, faces out onto the Eiffel Tower, there is a rather distinctive diamond-shaped shelving unit behind him and his server. This was not the unit's first appearance in the franchise. In Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, this exact shelving unit was shown sitting in Admiral Kirk's quarters. He and Bones have their toast alongside its shiny chrome exterior, as there is a stand for some of Kirk's more precious collectibles. It's also present for the man's first experience at Romulan ale, though of course this too would not be unique to that film. Number 3. Expensive but broken wheelchairs. While this list at this stage could easily now be titled Curios from Too Short a Season, another item from the episode makes an appearance here. Admiral Mark Jameson's state-of-the-art wheelchair was an absolute nightmare during filming, which cost the production team $10,000 and a lot of stress. However, it did save them a few quid when it came to the end of the season. Removing the front panel, they used it for Commander Remick's command chair in Conspiracy. To this day, there was no reason for this room to exist in Starfleet Command, other than the fact that Remick needed to have a slow pivot and reveal. This is not a complaint, mind, as it was a scene that was very evocative of any Bond villain reveal. The chair was quite distinctive, particularly with the wooden panel that ran from the front up around the edges and connected at the back. It was a learning curve for the team. When Deep Space Nine episode Melora was in production, the team opted for a much more straightforward chair, making it far easier to manage in each scene. Number 2. Starfleet issue lamp. This lamp has made many appearances in Star Trek, beginning in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. They were incredibly distinctive as they sat in front of all of the Starfleet's top brass along with the senior staff of the Enterprise A. They're all set at the same height, as it is shown in later episodes they can be retracted or extended as needed. They next appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation in the episode The First Duty, sitting in Wesley Crusher's quarters. They would later appear in several times in Enterprise. In the episode First Flight, there's one sitting in the locker room where Robinson is changing. Clearly, it's the easiest lamp to roll out when needed for the set, while also looking slightly futuristic. It's a simple and neat trick that works a treat. Number 1. Those tubes with the red lights. These are, to date, the most reused prop in all of Star Trek, crossing time boundaries and series themselves. They've appeared alongside Kirk, the Enterprise D, the NX-01, and even several appearances on Voyager. They were clearly chosen for their aesthetic, as they had a wonderfully alien tech look to them. There's also a bit of a hindrance to them. They're so iconic now that they instantly stand out in any scene that they're in. For example, in the Enterprise episode Cold Station 12, they're easily recognizable even with the lights inside switched off. Their first appearance was in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, merely sitting in the control room aboard Regular 1, and from that day to this, there has never been much explanation as to what they do or why they're on board the ship. They've popped up in Data Lore, Quality of Life, and Inside Man as well, with each time simply in place for the characters to have a look at, without truly interacting with. They're similar to that potted plant you buy for the table in the hall. You walk past it every day and never look at it, but the second it's gone, the entire room is thrown into disarray. One of the beautiful things about cameras is that they tend to pick up an awful lot of things, whether those things are meant to be there or not. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 times Star Trek accidentally filmed things you weren't supposed to see. Number 10. Newspaper on the floor, Star Trek the original series, The Lights of Zetar. This comes at around 48 minutes into the episode. We have Spock, Kirk, and McCoy sitting around a table chatting when, clearly visible on the floor just behind them, there is someone's discarded newspaper. Now, far be it from us to ever say that, maybe somebody should have checked the shot before they started hitting record, but this newspaper was clearly left behind by somebody who was a little bit unhappy, maybe a little bit disgruntled, or maybe someone who was just looking for a little bit of glory. And seeing as more than 50 years later we're still talking about it, I'm going to say that, yeah, they got their bit of glory. Now, it's a bit unclear to see what date is on that newspaper, but it probably isn't 2266, which is when the episode was set. Number 9. Camera equipment where no man has gone before. The second pilot of Star Trek the original series was famous for introducing and then getting rid of Gary Mitchell and Elizabeth Daner, but also giving us Kirk and Sulu and Scotty. We also obviously got Spock in the cage, and we wouldn't get McCoy for another episode yet. Now, while all this is going, it being a second pilot, it's understandable if potentially some things didn't go the way they meant to.
such as being able to see equipment in the shot. When Mitchell and Kelso are sitting at the navigation section, there's a moment where the camera pans back and you can clearly see some rigging and tubes that go with the cameras that would have been filming the shot. Now, seeing as we are not used to seeing cameras on the bridge, at least not in these conventional ways, this was clearly an error that should have been chopped out of the episode, but seeing as Star Trek was riding on the high of being given a second shot of the pilot, you know what? I think we'll allow them this little gaffe. Number 8. Data's chair needed a wedge of carpet. Encounter at Farpoint. At about 4 minutes into the pilot of Star Trek The Next Generation, Picard is talking to Data when he asks him questions about what they can expect in the future. Data, ever the diligent officer, stands up, turns and begins to speak to his captain. It's a lovely, bright, wide shot which gives us a great view of the ops and con stations, the view screen, and the wedge of carpet that's been shoved in underneath actor Brent Spiner's chair. It's quite a funny moment because, again, similar to the previous entry on this list, this was the pilot of The Next Generation, so things were still being finished and, still being put together, if you like. The fact that they hadn't managed to level off Brent Spiner's chair, but fixed it with a rather ingenious way of doing so, that in itself is quite funny. Probably shouldn't have been included in the shot itself, but hey, maybe this is one of those things where they cut some corners while filming the Galaxy-class Enterprise D. Number 7. Tear in the carpet when the bow breaks. At about 52 seconds into this first season episode of The Next Generation, we again find ourselves drawn toward the floor of the bridge. This time, rather than beside Data's station, it's beside LaForge's station. As Riker enters the bridge from the lower turbo lift, the one that's beside the captain's ready room, the camera just nice and quickly pans through the room, giving us a look at the carpet. Well, obviously someone had caught something on the carpet that day, because there was a fairly large tear just behind actor LeVar Burton. It's only visible for a second, and it's perhaps forgivable that they thought this wouldn't be included in the shot, but it does suggest that somebody should have made another pass on that carpet and on that view. I mean, quite frankly, you just can't get the staff these days. Number 6. Face in the Ornament, Unification Part 2. Now, this one is one of the slightly infamous shots from The Next Generation that they did actually manage to fix when it came to the remaster. In Unification Part 2, at about 41 minutes into the episode, Data, Spock and Picard escape from Tasila's office. Now, in the original version of this episode, there is a very shiny, very reflective green ornament sitting on Sila's desk. That ornament manages to reflect the slightly casual-looking face of a man chewing gum, happy out, part of the crew. Now, because this was so clear in the shot, this one is kind of easy to fix when it came to the remaster. Now, of course, when you see the shot in the episode that's been released on the Blu-ray, you can see that that ornament has no reflection whatsoever. It's one of the cool things that they've been able to do with the remaster of The Next Generation. Not that every episode had something like this in it, but with the advancements of technology, they were able to clean up some of those little things that must have annoyed them from the original run. Number 5. Black Cardboard Squares. This entry comes with a lot of thanks to our friends over at Ex Astris Scientia. In some of the early TNG episodes, we can see that parts of the large displays on the rear end of the Enterprise D bridge are covered with black cardboard. Now, you might be wondering what on earth people were doing going around sticking around blacked out bits of old cereal boxes on the reflective surfaces of the ship for. Well, the important word there is reflective. As the filming at the time was using slightly older style cameras, a lot of light was needed to light all of these sets, and that would often create reflections in the glass along with shadows on the floor. Oftentimes, you would see clearly the bulb from these lights in those black screens. So, these black pieces of cardboard were stuck over these display panels as a way of fixing that, with the hope that the viewer would never notice. However, along comes the remaster. TNG was obviously beautifully remastered when it was released on Blu-ray, which absolutely brought up every single frame to the highest possible standard. However, it also meant everything was much more visible, including these black squares. Now, without any context, these black squares look pretty silly, but in context, I mean, they still look pretty silly, but at least we understand why they're there. Number 4. Blocking tape, the Sword of Kahless. To be honest, it's a bit shocking that there isn't many versions of this gaff throughout all of Star Trek, because it seems like it would be the easiest little slip up to have happen. When you're choreographing a scene and trying to organize where to put the camera and where to put the actors, it's most common that you'll put a marker down on the floor, whether that be, an actual marker, like some sort of coloring pen, or masking tape, which would also be the most straightforward way of doing it. When John Kalikos' core is waking up, this is just after the opening credits of this episode, he is passed out on the floor. Jadzia Dax walks into the room and begins to lift and help him up to his feet. As the camera pans, the marking tape for the floor is very clearly visible, and it stands out because we haven't really seen this masking tape being used in DS9 so far. Although, to be honest, we wouldn't be massively shocked if Chief O'Brien always carried a roll of it somewhere around in one of those pockets of his. Number 3. Nika the dog, ex post facto. There are many things I love about my job, and there are many things which are strange about my job. But when I say that I spent a bit of today looking at screen grabs of a dog's private parts, I've got to say it's somewhere in the middle of where I've been with this role. In the first season of Star Trek Voyager, episode Ex Post Facto, Tom Paris is framed for a crime he didn't commit. The way that he is exposed is the fact that Nika the dog is not used to him in the apartment, but is used to one of the other characters. So, what's wrong with this scene? Well, Nika is referred to as a female dog for the entirety of the episode. When Nika the dog runs into the shot, Nika is very obviously a male dog. I mean, why make such a point of it if you just knew that some poor guy was going to have to go and take a screen grab of this in the future? Do you know what? It's fine. I'm over it. Number 2. Chewing gum on duty, drone. At about 34 minutes into this episode, the drone, which was created from a fusion of Seven's nanoprobes and the Doctor's mobile emitter, accidentally sends a proximity alarm to the Borg collective, which alerts them to their presence. Now, when Seven awakes to find Janeway and a whole troop of security officers standing fully armed in front of them, she is understandably alarmed. Everything is very tense and serious. She's informed by the captain to wake the drone and to ask why he's done this. It is, of course, a automatic thing that's happened, not his fault. Everyone remains tense. That is, of course, except for this one guard, who's clearly chewing gum in the middle of the scene. Probably not Starfleet issue, especially when Chief O'Brien and Dr. Bashir make such a point about how chewing gum was no longer a thing in the 24th century, so O'Brien was able to create his own for Take Me Out to the Holosuite infused with scotch. Number 1. Interesting choreography, what's past as prologue. In one of the climactic episodes of Star Trek Discovery's first season, we see the mirror universe of Captain Lorca taking on the Empress Georgiou. Now they are giving it socks. She throws a knife directly into his back, which looks quite painful if we're honest. But meanwhile, what's going on around them is that Michael Burnham is having a proper old punch-up with some of Lorca's guards, including Ellen Landry. Now, when the camera closes in on Lorca and Georgiou's final fight, which includes just fantastic swordplay, we see Burnham in the background going toe-to-toe with one of Lorca's guards. Then it closes in and Burnham swings a punch which connects, except that it doesn't. She's about a foot away from the other woman, who reacts as though she's just been slapped in the face. Clearly, this is because this was not meant to be captured in the shot. So, while we're enjoying Lorca and Georgiou go at it, We're kind of now distracted by the fact of doesn't take much to take down some of Lorca's guards.
A simple costume inconsistency or glitched animation can really affect the immersion of a scene, and Trekkies probably nitpick their favourite franchise far more than any other fans, so very few mistakes go unnoticed and new ones are being found all the time. Many of the entries in this video have actually been removed from their scenes in the new Blu-ray remastered episodes, but some are still included. And though they don't ever ruin the scenes they appear in, these mistakes can really take the viewer out of it. So let's get ready to do what Trekkies do best: overanalyzing and complaining about tiny details that most people didn't even notice. Now, we have already done a video talking about some of the craziest things that accidentally appeared on camera in Star Trek, but there were so many comments on that video that we had tons more to cover. The sleuths over at X*Scientia have unearthed more over the years. So with thanks to Jörg Hillebrand and the Star Trek community, I'm Ellie with TrekCulture, here with 10 more times Star Trek accidentally filmed things you weren't meant to see. Number 10. Geordi dropping his phaser. The Next Generation episode Skin of Evil is infamous for killing off one of the main cast members, Tasha Yar, so early in the series. But there's a small production mistake in the episode that usually goes unnoticed. About 25 minutes and 30 seconds into the episode, Riker got pulled into Armis's pit of black sludge, and Geordi was apparently so shocked that he dropped his phaser into the goo, running over to try to help him. It's unlikely that this was planned because Geordi's phaser appeared perfectly goo-free after Picard beamed down, plus nobody really acknowledged it. The editors may have decided to keep LeVar Burton's mistake in the scene though, as it actually makes Geordi seem more naturally shocked by his friend being taken. Given what happened to Tasha and Riker, it's not likely that anyone reached their hand in the pit to pull it out, so we're just going to assume that someone handed Geordi a replacement off camera. Number 9. The stunt wire in The Final Frontier. Near the end of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, Kirk got zapped by the god alien, and for a short moment you can see the stunt wire that was used to yank him backwards. In fact, you can even see it pulling on his uniform. The production crew probably didn't worry about the wire because it was fairly well hidden in the shadows, but the light flashing when Kirk was shot lit it up so much more. This is why it's super important for the effects team to test their scene under a variety of lighting conditions before filming to make sure that hidden details like stunt wires stay hidden. The scene would have probably even worked better if Shatner just fell backwards onto some pillows off camera or something, because the wires in the scene completely eradicated any sense of immersion in a moment that was already so out there. Number 8. The makeup artist in Data's dream. In part 1 of the Next Generation episode Birthright, Data started having dreams about his creator, Dr. Soong. During his second dream of the episode, after he turned into a bird and flew past Dr. Soong, June Abston Haymore, a makeup artist for the show, appeared briefly sitting in front of a door. She was most likely on break and didn't realise that she was in the shot. She was digitally removed from this scene in the remaster of the episode, but can still be seen, though less noticeably, in the first dream sequence. There have been a number of other instances where members of the production crew have accidentally shown up in scenes, but given that this sequence was all an illusion inside of Data's mind, her appearance is even harder to write off. Either way, the dream sequences in this episode were trippy enough that not many people noticed June sitting there. Number 7. The misplaced sandbag. At the beginning of the Next Generation episode The Child, there was a scene where Riker got out of the captain's chair and walked towards the view screen before visiting Picard in his ready room. Now, this mistake was removed from the scene in the Next Generation remaster, but in the original edit of the episode, right after Riker stood up, you could see what looked like a small bag the same colour as the floor at the bottom of the frame. It looks like a purse or something, but what you're actually seeing is a sandbag, a weighted bag that television crews sometimes use to secure the tripods for their cameras and other equipment in place. It looks like the sandbag was originally put there to record a different shot, but when they finished and moved on to the scene with Riker, they must have forgotten to move it. Number 6. Characters touching space. Most of the windows on starships, space stations, and other things in Trek are actually just massive holes in the wall. Using glass or transparent plastic would produce glare from the studio lighting, just like some consoles on the sets do. Usually we can ignore this and assume that Starfleet just keeps really clean windows, but a few times actors have actually accidentally reached through these openings on camera. During a scene in a Kazon shuttle in the Voyager episode's Investigations, Tom Paris grabbed onto the edge of the window opening for support and wrapped his hand around to the exterior. Also, in the Next Generation episode Transfigurations, the character John Doe rested his hand where the glass should be in the Enterprise's observation lounge. Maybe it's time for starships in the Trek universe to put up some signs warning you to keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times. Number 5. Dr. Bashir's Shoe Swap. The two-parter Birthright was one of the very few crossover episodes on The Next Generation. In the episode, the Enterprise D docked at Deep Space Nine to assist the station with repairs, giving the two crews some time to chat with each other. In the first part of the episode, Dr. Bashir came aboard the Enterprise and ended up working with Data for a while. Near the end, at about 38 minutes in, the two had a chat about Data's recent dreamlike experiences while walking down the corridor. Now, it is easy to miss, but at the beginning of this scene, you can see that Bashir is wearing his typical black boots that he always wears with his uniform. But seconds later, when he walks away from Data, you can see him wearing what looks like white tennis shoes. The cast would evidently sometimes wear different shoes when their feet were off camera, either for comfort or to reduce the noise of their steps. Number 4. The many scripts in the background. Nobody can blame Star Trek actors for keeping their scripts near them on set. The amount of technobabble and other overly complicated dialogue can make their lines way more difficult to memorize than those of most TV shows. Still, the amount of scripts that you can find scattered in the background throughout Trek is truly incredible, specifically in The Next Generation. To name a few examples from Next Gen, one can be seen in the episode Suddenly Human on a desk near Worf and Dr. Crusher, another in the episode Cost of Living on a bed, one laying next to a medical table in the episode Ethics, and on a step beside Picard in the episode Violations. This may go unnoticed on most TV shows, but in the Trek universe, paper and books are so uncommon that the scripts really do stand out. The ones mentioned here were the most noticed, but eagle-eyed fans are noticing more all the time. Number 3. Kirk's wardrobe malfunction. As everyone knows, Kirk has a huge reputation for having his shirt torn off in combat. In fact, it's difficult to find a single episode where he stayed fully clothed the entire time. Still though, one of his wardrobe malfunctions stands out from the rest. During a fight scene between the captain and an alien recreation of the historic human war criminal Philip Green in the original series episode The Savage Curtain, Kirk got forced into a rather compromising position that caused a hole breach in his trousers. The scene is quick and easy to miss, but you can see the butt of his pants rip right after landing on his back during the fight scene at around 28 minutes in. The show's crew often tore rips into his uniforms on purpose, but it definitely doesn't look like that's the case here, especially considering it was fixed by the time we saw Mr. Shatner's rear section again. Number 2. The accidental Star Trek logo text. Star Trek doesn't like to break the fourth wall often, and when they do, it's usually not intentional. This was for sure the case in the Next Generation episode Identity Crisis, when we saw the Star Trek title logo appear on an engineering console extremely briefly. The logo appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye in the scene in engineering at around 16 minutes and 30 seconds in, and was removed from the remastered version of the series. The logo was obviously just labeling done by the props and effects team, but this simple scene has so much fan theory potential. Do the characters of Next Gen know they're in a TV show? Is the series all one big made-up propaganda piece for Starfleet and the Federation? Could the Enterprise computer be glitching through into our reality? Probably not, but we're Star Trek fans, and reading too much into tiny details is what we do best. Number 1. LCARS cursors and pop-ups. The touchscreen computer interface used aboard Starfleet ships known as LCARS, short for Library Computer Access and Retrieval System, quickly became an iconic part of the show, appearing in the background of just about every episode beyond the original and animated series, though they were rarely actual computers. Because of the high cost and simplicity of computer graphics at the start of the next generation, most of the LCAR's interfaces were just decorative artwork lit from the back, but occasionally, when more detail was needed, the prop department would use actual animations on computer monitors. This became more and more common in the later Trek installments. These animations fit in really well most of the time, but every now and then we saw hints that they were running on 20th century computers. In the Voyager episode Good Shepherd, for example, you can make out what looks like a mouse cursor in the corner of an LCARS animation, as well as some sort of pop-up menu on a bio bed.
Listen, I know all about trying to save a little bit of money by trying to reuse things, okay? You know things are grim when you're down to reusing things like toilet paper. But if you're reusing shots, that's not actually that bad. With that in mind, I am Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here is 10 times Star Trek reused footage and hoped you wouldn't notice. Number 10. Excelsior model, Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, the USS Excelsior was introduced in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. It was the next big experiment, it was trans-warp, it was taken out by removing a little couple of chips. Don't ever leave Scotty alone in engineering again. In Encounter at Farpoint, it appears as the USS Hood. It then appears many more times throughout The Next Generation. And the truth is, a lot of this is reused footage. It just makes the most sense to capture a lot of footage together and then just space it out. For example, in the second season opener, The Child, we get a nice 3/4 shot view of the Excelsior that we technically hadn't seen before, right? That same shot turns up time and time again. There's not a single thing wrong with this because it's used sparingly, and it's also a use of the real model again and again, with thanks to shots from ILM. So quite frankly, I noticed, but I liked it. Number 9, Cardassian ship, Call to Arms, Caretaker. When Star Trek Voyager started, it began with a bang. The Maquis raider Valjean is being chased by a Cardassian Galar-class warship. It is a beautiful close-up shot of the ship hunting down the smaller one. When it came to the Dominion War in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, it made sense, of course, now that we were going to have a lot more shots of Cardassian ships, of Jem'Hadar ships, kind of reuse whatever we can. In Call to Arms, there is quite a bit of reused footage that's used cleverly, but the reason this one stands out is because it was so effectively shot in Caretaker, particularly with those torpedoes impacting with the front and the kind of the belly of the Galar class, that when that shot is exactly reused in Call to Arms, it does stand out a tiny little bit. Now, it's not the only one, of course. We have shots of the wing of the Galar class. In Call to Arms, they fire a torpedo at it. Now, that is a direct lift from Caretaker. It's the Galar class being hit by the plasma storm in the Badlands. We also have a reuse of some shots from Emissary as well in Call to Arms. Now, again, sounds like I'm ragging on it. It's not. You got to use your shots sparingly. You got to use your shots effectively. And when you have fleet shots like this, do what you can to get away with it, and I would argue it worked very, very well. Number 8, the Excelsior at Warp, Star Trek VI and Star Trek Generations. Now, this is one that we've mentioned a couple of times on this channel. It's because it's disappointing, and Generations is going to come up a couple of times on this list. The Excelsior was used extensively in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. You had Captain Sulu, of course. He opens the film with the impact of the Genesis wave. Later on in the film, the Excelsior, disobeying Starfleet orders, sets a course for Kittimer to help Kirk and crew against the Klingons. Now, there is, of course, some lovely, lovely shots of the Excelsior at warp. In Star Trek Generations, the Enterprise B, which is, of course, Excelsior class, gets a distress call from the Elorian transports trapped in the Nexus. They set a course and they engage at maximum warp. They had to adjust the filming model of the Enterprise B because it had to take damage on the star drive section. That's what the fins were added for. Overall, it was the same model as the Excelsior with a few extra bits stuck on. The advent of HD, and particularly Blu-ray, has not done this film any favors, particularly in the scene that shows the Enterprise B at warp, because it's not the Enterprise B at all. It is a copy and paste from Star Trek The Undiscovered Country of the Excelsior at Warp, and as we have moved into more HD and bigger screens, it's a bit bloody obvious, I'm afraid. Number 7, launching the Defiant. The Search Part 1, the die is cast. If we're lucky, every new ship will get a lovely pan by and a launch scene that we will get to enjoy time and time again. Star Trek the Motion Picture, I'm looking at you. The launch of the USS Defiant in the Search Part 1 is given that great moment. The camera pans over the top of the ship, we get to see it turning, we get to see all the lights turning on. It's really, really nice. Now again, it makes sense if you have some really, really nice shots to try and use them. Issue here is that it's used again in the same season, shot for shot. The die is cast, although it comes at the end of season 3-ish, does use this launch scene in pretty much an identical pattern to the Search Part 1, which means that in the age of binging, that really stands out a little bit. Now, I'm not complaining for getting a lovely shot of the Defiant, God, far be it. The only thing is that, maybe just give us a couple of different angles or something like that. Number 6, Enterprise A reveal, Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Star Trek V The Final Frontier. Listen, this is probably one of the least of Star Trek V's issues. The end of Star Trek The Voyage Home has what is, for me, one of the most stirring moments in the Star Trek movie franchise, and that is where Kirk and crew are on board a shuttle, they pan up over the saucer section of the Excelsior, then still NX-2000, and get that glorious reveal of the Enterprise A, which is the refit Constitution class that had been the USS Yorktown, confirmed off screen. Great scene, lovely, stands in the memory forever. So the fact that it's used as the first shot of the Enterprise A in Star Trek V is really a little bit frustrating. It's like, oh guys, come on, we've already seen this. Again, I know Star Trek V has many issues, and we do get some nice shots of the Enterprise A in 5, but this was such an annoying reuse of footage. It was like, guys, come on, you could have done better. Number 5, Bird of Prey flying toward the sun, Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Redemption Part 2. Now, the Bird of Prey will turn up again on this list, but here, I feel it's actually very effective reuse of footage. In Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, we have Kirk and crew on their kidnapped Klingon Bird of Prey. They go into time warp by flying around the sun. It's a great scene, it's lots of fun. There's also some really nice close-up shots of the Bird of Prey, which was then still a fairly new ship in the canon. We got some lovely shots in Star Trek 3, but this was really some of the sexier shots of the Klingon ship. So it is one of those shots that sticks in the mind. Fast forward to the start of season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation, and the opening shot is that fly toward the sun. Now, it's reused very cleverly, because instead of it just being the Bird of Prey going into time warp again, it's actually they're mid-battle. There's more Klingon ships attacking this one because we have, of course, kicked off into the Klingon Civil War. It's clever and effective because of two things. One is that the actual filming style of The Next Generation was very different from what was done in Star Trek 4. So this shot actually looks quite different from a lot of the other shots in The Next Generation, which means it stands out a little bit. But because it's the first shot we see of season 5, it stands out in all the right ways. It starts with a bang, and it's a great way to hook the audience in to what turned out to be a very action-packed episode. Number 4, Topside Assault on the Defiant, The Search Part 1, Call to Arms. Now again, we love Call to Arms. We do forgive it for reusing footage for all the reasons I said in the previous entry. This shot shows the Jem'Hadar attacking the Defiant from above. In The Search Part 1, it was upsetting to see that this cool new Starfleet warship was effectively taken down so easily by the Jem'Hadar. This was, of course, to further the threat that they faced. I mean, we had previously seen them take out a Galaxy-class ship fairly easily, so what hope did the Defiant have? Now, throughout seasons 3, 4, and 5, we had seen the Defiant survive quite a bit of assault. So when that exact shot is used once again in Call to Arms, it's concerning, but the Defiant survives. So it's kind of a play on this footage as well. And of course the arrival of Martok and the Rotarans certainly helps this scene as well. It just stands out because, quite frankly, it's such a cool bloody shot of the ship with some very, very heavy fire on board, but it does stand out. It is quite noticeable. Number 3, numerous shots, what you leave behind. I'm going to sound like I'm going to be quite harsh on this one for a second, but I appreciate that there was a lot to do in the last episode of Deep Space Nine. Now, there was a lot of reused footage in this episode. It's frustrating because instead of giving us what was or could have been an effective battle at the end of the Dominion War, we get what is effectively a best of some of the battles that we've seen already. Another is the reuse of footage from Star Trek Generations. Again, this is seen when some of the Klingon ships are destroyed and we get what is the interior shots of the Bird of Prey being destroyed in Generations, with that poor Klingon bloke flying through the corridor. We also have as well, and this one for me is probably the most unforgivable, is that there is a destruction of a Cardassian ship. Now, there's a shot to inside, and we see a Cardassian running away, covering their face with their hands as the bulkheads explode. That shot is from the immediate preceding episode, The Dogs of War. That Cardassian is Garak. There's no reason whatsoever for him to be on a Cardassian ship as it's exploding. It was a case of reshowing it way too soon. So unfortunately, while I love What You Leave Behind as an episode, I think it's a really good conclusion to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the reused footage really does stand out in this episode. Number 2, Leaving Dry Dock, Star Trek The Motion Picture, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan. This one for me, completely forgivable, because also I would give my left arm to just able to watch the USS Enterprise leaving dry dock over and over again. Oh my god, I love this scene. Star Trek The Motion Picture thankfully gave us beautiful, beautiful shots of the refit Enterprise. And, you know, that massive, feels like 75 minutes pan by the ship as Kirk and Scotty are flying around. I love that. Like, gimme, gimme, gimme. However, as we've discussed on this channel before in our documentary breakdown of Star Trek The Motion Picture, the budget for that film basically ballooned to the point where it didn't make as much of a profit as anyone would have liked. So when it came to Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, the budget was slashed and they had to get creative. So, first thing you do, reuse whatever footage you can. I think it works. It absolutely works because, again, this is all big screen. This is the new James Horner score over this scene of the Enterprise leaving dry dock. Actually works really, really well. Musically, I might prefer Jerry Goldsmith's score, but there's no denying that Horner's bombastic score for this really, really works perfectly because it changes the mood of the scene. Now look, is it shot for shot? Yeah, it is. Is that a problem? No, not even a little bit. Number 1. That explosion. Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek Generations. Guys, if you're going to talk reused footage in Star Trek, this has to be the one. This is annoying. As we probably all know, at the end of Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, the Enterprise and the Excelsior overwhelm Chang's Bird of Prey with a barrage of torpedo fire. This causes the ship to explode. It's cool. Right, it is cool. In Star Trek Generations, one torpedo, okay, fair enough, torpedo technology has developed over the years, takes out the Duras sisters' Bird of Prey. It's exactly the same explosion, exactly the same shot. It is not simply the fact that this is so obviously reused footage that's annoying, and again, in the very next film, the problem is that the whole point of it standing out in The Undiscovered Country is that it was something we hadn't seen before. It was so detailed. It was great. And the next film, that's frustrating. That just didn't work. And it's almost to the point where I'd nearly look away during Generations at this point when that's happening. And I like Generations, but this is just bloody unforgivable. It's one of these things where on a reused footage list,
this was always going to be number one.
Anyone reusing anything is, of course, a terrible person who should be called out immediately because, you know, like, we've never, ever reused anything for any reason, ever. Basically what we're saying is that sometimes reusing stuff just makes perfect sense. Now, you don't want to, like, be all up in somebody's face about it. So, with that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 times Star Trek reused ships, and hoped you wouldn't notice. Number 10. Romulan Scout Ship, Science Vessel, Narada. The Romulan scout ship was designed by Rick Sternbach, debuting in the Defector. The design was based on Andrew Probert's earlier Dideridex-class warbird, echoing the green colour scheme, wingspan and forward module. This initial design was more obviously a small support vessel, evidenced by cockpit windows at the front. The next phase would then introduce the Romulan Science Vessel. For this, the studio model was altered, with the forward module being changed, and the more obvious cockpit design being removed. At the aft of the ship, a hammerhead-style crescent was added, this time serving as a section similar to the sensor pod on a Nebula-class ship. The ship would then return in Favourite Son. This time, the only significant change was to the colour of the ship. Sternbach himself was less than thrilled with the model's continual changes, lamenting that once the designs left his desk, he had no control over what happened to them. When it came to the Science Vessel, and the Narada specifically, these were quite obviously the same design, a Romulan one, and stood out in the episode. Number 9. Mercenary Ship, Miradoran Raider, Teresian Ship. The distinctive vessel that debuted in the episode Vortex is perhaps best recognised as Arctis Baran's pirate ship, despite that being its second appearance. The Miradoran Raider Theta class was designed by Ricardo F. Delgado and was labelled as an alien concept or a raptor. The design, striking as it was, inevitably returned. Gambit sees Picard and Riker taken captive aboard the vessel, which at this point is described as roughly 1/4 the length of the Enterprise D. For this instance, there may actually have been an on-screen explanation as to the reuse of the design. With Baran commanding a mercenary crew, they may simply have stolen or paid outright for a Miradoran Raider. What is a little harder to explain is the return of the vessel in the Delta Quadrant. Here it takes the form of a Teresian ship, making it another reused studio model to appear in the episode Favourite Son. The ship saw no adjustments, either in outward design or relative scale, to suggest that this was simply a similar shape of ship. At least the Romulan science ship went through a colour change. Number 8. Federation Fighter, Kraylor Warship. Jim Martin designed the Federation fighter for the Deep Space Nine episode The Maquis. It was built with Star Wars as an inspiration, something Doug Drexler would later joke gave people acid indigestion. The model would return in Preemptive Strike, again used by the Maquis, before they would make their debut as true Federation vessels in A Time to Stand. For these uses, having the ship appear with the Maquis and Starfleet suggested that these vessels had simply been co-opted by the terrorist organization, so having them play multiple roles made sense. Slightly more difficult to explain, once again, was their appearance in the Delta Quadrant. In Nightingale, Harry Kim takes command of a Kraylor medical ship that bears a striking resemblance to these small attack ships. The design was altered to give the Nightingale a larger feel, adding decks to the ship via multiple lights, along with the suggestion of a beefier engine. The ship would return a second time in Voyager, though this is somewhat excusable. In The Void, an Anari warship bearing the same configuration is encountered by Voyager, though the Anari had been established as combatants within a war with the Kraylor in the earlier episode. Much like the Klingons and Romulans, who's to say there weren't some shared ideas between the two? Number 7. Karama Ship, Bajoran Impulse Ship, Antarian Ship. The Karama ship was designed by John Eaves for Deep Space Nine in the episode Starship Down. It was constructed as a physical model and as a CGI model, with the latter returning several times during the franchise. Despite the Karama being Gamma Quadrant dwellers, their ship turned up in both the Alpha and Delta quadrants. Shadows and Symbols sees Colonel Kira form a blockade around the Bajoran moon Derna, with her fleet containing 2 such vessels. In notes that were excised from the episode, it was suggested that these may in fact have been Karama ships left behind by the Dominion. The CGI model would then go on to appear in the episode Drive, this time portraying an Antarian vessel that rendezvous with Voyager. It also appears as an unnamed alien ship in Natural Law as well. The CGI made its final to-date appearance as a transport vessel in Enterprise, a good 200 years before Starfleet encountered the Karama or the discovery of the Bajoran wormhole. Great minds. Number 6. Grumal Nekrit Freighter, Klingon cargo ship. The Grumal freighter was one of John Eaves' first designs upon working for Star Trek. Being a Cardassian design, he took initial inspiration from Rick Sternbach's Galar-class warships, beginning with a similar forward section. However, the producers weren't too keen on this idea. They wanted the freighter to have a more industrial look. Eves flipped the design, softening the wings from the Galar class and dipped them. The distinctive Cardassian fork was now at the front of the ship, with huge cargo boxes making up the bulk of the core. The bridge was moved to the back of the ship, taking inspiration from real-world oil tankers. The studio model was then built, first appearing in the episode Return to Grace. It would return repainted in the Voyager episode Fair Trade. Later, Sons and Daughters saw it adapt a final time to become Klingon in nature. It was given another new paint job, with new warp engines added to the aft wings. The effects manager for the episode, David Stipes, wasn't too keen on the reuse, adapted as it was by Tony Meininger. He rationalised that the use of the design, as though the Klingons had captured these Cardassian freighters as trophies of war. Number 5. Klingon D7 battlecruiser, Romulan battlecruiser. The ship that would come to be known as the D7 class battlecruiser, designed by Matt Jeffries, had a very unusual start in life. It was designed at the urging of AMT models so that they might have a companion model to market alongside their model kit of the USS Enterprise. As such, it was the reverse of most processes. The toy came first before the ship would fly. Jeffries recalled that he worked on the design at home as there was neither time nor budget to do so at the studio. After numerous attempts, he based the ship on a manta ray, and the ship was almost done. The first shots of the model were done for the episode Elan of Troyes, firmly establishing it as a Klingon vessel. However, the model, which had delighted producers for the original series' third season, was quickly inserted wherever possible, including as a Romulan vessel in the Enterprise incident. A scheduling mix-up meant that this new Klingon ship, designed around Klingon people to be marketed as a Klingon battlecruiser, was shown first as a Romulan ship. The remastered versions of the original series fixed this by introducing the ship a little earlier and giving those seen in the Enterprise incident a more distinctly Romulan pattern underneath. But this was a model that had one of the strangest journeys to screen in the entire franchise. Number 4. Tyrellian plague ship, Katarian vessel. The distinctive Tyrellian plague ship that appeared in Haven was one of designer Andrew Probert's favourite projects for the Next Generation. He recalled that, after the Enterprise itself, this model gave him some of his fondest memories, as it had been a collaboration with Gene Roddenberry himself. Probert had become stuck when it came to the overall design. He knew that he wanted it to be different from the standard engines at the back shape that tended to dominate starships, so he came up with the idea of placing the engines at the front of the ship. He also based his design on Herman Zimmerman's plans for the main bridge, allowing him to build around it. It was Roddenberry who suggested moving the power source to the middle of the ship, which led to the spherical design as seen in the episode. This would be the only appearance of the ship in this configuration. The nose was subsequently altered to sport a more triangular shape, while the hull was removed from the ship's centre, then covered with deck plating. In this shape, it returned several more times, including as the Katarian vessel in the game, the Hunter's ship in Captive Pursuit, and the Zalconian ship in Transfigurations. Number 3. Promelian battlecruiser, Skrian ship. This particular model is the most unusual on this list, as it wasn't even designed for Star Trek to begin with. It was, in fact, designed by Steve Berg for the 1986 B-movie Night of the Creeps. In that fact, the model was shown in a single scene, floating over a graveyard. As it would not be presented in full relief, only the ventral side was given any detail. Once filming was completed, David Stipes came into possession of the model. When the script for Booby Trap came through, with precious little time to design the new ship that was called for, Stipes stepped in and loaned Trek the model. Interestingly, while Gregory Jean was normally responsible for building the new ship, he and his company were busy working on The Hunt for Red October, in which Gates McFadden appeared while on her gap year from Star Trek. The production team would significantly alter the model, flipping it so that the ventral side in the film would serve as the dorsal side in the episode. It would be filmed once again for Deep Space Nine for the episode Sanctuary, serving as the Skrian ship, with stock footage of this being used as Nogra's shuttle in Sons of Moog and as an unnamed alien ship in The Muse. Number 2. Temerian Deep Space Cruiser, Claystron starship. The ship began its life in the episode Suddenly Human. Rick Sternbach based the design on Coast Guard training ships with 2 solar-powered sails above and below the vessel. The pointed nose of the ship would end up being the section that lasted for each alteration. First, the ship was given a mild refit to appear as a Keosian ship in The Perfect Mate. The heaviest modification came when it was altered to become the Temerian Deep Space Cruiser, which debuted in the episode Darmok. Here, additional nacelle struts were added to the port and starboard with a red hue. This configuration would return in Deep Space Nine as both the Claystron and Tilani vessels, before appearing in Voyager as an imaginary Bothan ship and a Draen cruiser as well. After the initial refit to include the nacelles, the model largely remained of the same configuration, with simple changes like the colour of the nacelles, though for its appearance as the Draen starship, the nacelles themselves were given a mild change as well. Number 1. Tellarite Cruiser Xindi Arboreal Cruiser. John Eves designed the vessel that would appear in Enterprise, used periodically by 3 different alien species. First, it appeared as the Arconian Destroyer in Dawn. The ship was realised entirely in CGI, which presented Eves with an opportunity to use null space in its design. Design work for the Romulan Valdor Warbird had included a gap behind the head, so Eves reused the idea for this vessel. The problem with physical models, Eves commented, was that this type of ornamentation could lead to lighting issues. That wasn't a concern on CGI models. As often happened with his designs, Eves then found his Arconian destroyer returning as the Xindi Arboreal ship, minus the blaster from the underside of the ship, joining the Xindi fleet. The ship would then see an updated colour scheme for its next appearance as the Tellarite ship in Enterprise's 4th season. This seems to be the allegiance that has stuck with the design, as a Tellarite sleeper ship of this configuration was seen in Star Trek Prodigy as well. Star Trek hasn't just turned out some fairly impressive acting talent over the years, it's also turned out some fairly impressive directing talent. Thanks to the production, several of the people who appeared in front of the camera moved to test their skills behind the camera across all of the different iterations. This list is going to take you through just 10 examples of those who have successfully made the change. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 Star Trek actors who became directors. Number 10. René Auberjonois. Though audiences would know him best as Odo, René Auberjonois also directed 8 episodes of Deep Space Nine. The first episode, Profit Motive, would prove to be a challenge for him. He remarked that it was like leading an army into battle, as there were relentless questions that needed answering. He quipped that this, and making decisions, were things he truly didn't enjoy doing. His catalogue would include some of the all-time great episodes like Waltz, but also Let He Who Is Without Sin. Unfortunately, this episode ranks among the lowest of the series. To be very fair, this was an episode that faced numerous behind-the-scenes issues. One such example was that Terry Farrell required a tent between shoots as she couldn't be in direct sunlight for too long. The production had forgotten to source one, so Auberjonois himself had to chase one down. Another issue was that the location scouted was covered by spiny tackburs, a plant with thorns that easily poked through skin, hardly a fun addition to a beach shoot. Despite the challenges, Auberjonois would direct episodes all the way into the 7th season, ending with Strange Bedfellows. Number 9. Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart's first go behind the camera was in the 5th season of The Next Generation. In Theory is a relatively simple episode, with a starring turn from Brent Spiner and guest actor Michelle Scarabelli as Jenna DeSora. Though another data-centric episode, A Fistful of Datas, may be the more iconic episode, it's this one that Stewart chose as his favourite overall. Stewart recalled being grateful that the episode was close to a bottle show, featuring scenes on the ship only. There were no shoot-em-ups or scenes on Kronos, which made life much easier for the newbie director. He was also incredibly grateful that Spiner was the focus of the episode, as he felt the man was both strong enough to carry the episode easily, but was also very open to Stewart's direction. He would go on to direct other episodes like Hero Worship and Phantasms, but the aforementioned Datas and the penultimate episode Preemptive Strike stand out the most. Imposters, the recent episode of Picard's 3rd season, picks up beautifully from those final scenes of Preemptive Strike, giving the audience a payoff from Stewart's direction 30 years in the making. Number 8. Gates McFadden. Gates McFadden was the first female Trek actor to direct an episode of the franchise, namely Genesis. McFadden took a back seat when it came to acting. Dr. Crusher is sprayed in the face with acid early in the script, so that she could concentrate on making everything come together. And then an earthquake shut down production. The 1994 Northridge earthquake occurred right in the middle of filming and saw 57 deaths along with billions of dollars of damage. This was only another challenge for McFadden and her team to overcome. The production schedule, which saw this being filmed after the holidays that year, was, ironically, a blessing, at least from Michael Westmore's point of view. The episode is heavy on prosthetics, so Westmore's team were able to work through the time off, to hit their deadlines. The end result is one of the sillier Trek outings, but it's also iconic in its own right. Whether it was McFadden's skill as a director, or as a choreographer, and former Jim Henson puppeteer that served the episode best is anyone's guess. All we can be really sure of is that the Spider Barkley scared the absolute webbing out of all of us. Number 7. Alexander Siddig. Alexander Siddig directed 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, the 5th season's Business as Usual, and then the 6th season's poorly received Profit and Lace. For his first outing, Siddig was tasked with 2 big guest stars, Lawrence Tierney and Stephen Burkoff. On a recent episode of the Clone Star Pod, Siddig revealed a massive curveball that had been thrown his way during filming. One morning, in the makeup chair, Tierney suffered a stroke. He was thankfully rushed to the hospital and was able to then come back and film his scene, but even that came with its challenges. For the second episode, the reception was not kind. The script for Profit and Lace was a little mixed in terms of tone, so production went with a comedic angle. Unfortunately, it turned a ho-hum story into something downright offensive, making it not only a missed opportunity for all concerned, but contributed to there being far fewer Ferengi-centric episodes for the show's remaining run. Number 6. William Shatner. Star Trek V is infamous in many ways, with much of the ridicule directed toward William Shatner as director. While there's certainly some fair criticisms to make, one must take the timing of production as well as the budget into account. To start with 2 massive positives, Shatner managed to get Jerry Goldsmith to return to score the film, his first Trek outing since the motion picture. Second, the film contains the best scenes of the trio from the entire franchise. Who hasn't attempted to toast a marshmallow at this point? With ILM busy on The Last Crusade, the effects were shopped out to cheaper companies, and it shows. The film's climax is also slightly rushed owing to the budget and, honestly, the design of Shatner's rock monsters just ballooning. In the end, The Final Frontier is certainly one of the weakest Trek films, with some of the more melodramatic moments contributing to this. Though this would spell the end of Shatner's directing career, at least in Star Trek, is it truly that bad? Perhaps time will tell. Number 5. Avery Brooks. When it comes to literally anything, Avery Brooks brings 110%. As positive as this sounds, it can also be intimidating, with several of the people who worked under him attesting to it. Terry Farrell, when discussing his acting skills, would comment that she found it a challenge to match him in their scenes, though he graciously matched her energy. Behind the camera, it would be no different. When making his directorial debut on Tribunal, he got into a discussion with his assistant BC Cameron. Cameron recalled that he invited her to the set of Quark's Bar, which was in darkness at the time, and said with a grin, "I want you to make sure I get what I need." There followed an exchange that culminated in Cameron informing Brooks that she wasn't sure he had a sense of humour, and that he needed to be clearer with his instructions, after which their relationship improved dramatically. Brooks would go on to direct several more episodes, including Far Beyond the Stars. While filming Benny Russell's Breakdown, Brooks was so lost in the moment that he forgot to call cut. The actors around him let the scene play out, as they weren't sure whether to interrupt or not. The result is clear in the finished episode, with both the starring turn and the direction offering some of Brooks's finest work. Number 4. Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy's journey to the director's chair is rather intriguing, especially as it very nearly didn't happen. While filming The Wrath of Khan, an urban legend surrounding the actor began to creep along, namely that he demanded to be killed off so he could escape Star Trek. When production on The Search for Spock was being organised, Nimoy waited for some time for Michael Eisner, then head of Paramount Studios, to get back to him about the job of director. When the meeting eventually took place, Eisner was adamant that Nimoy shouldn't get the job, based on the aforementioned rumour. Nimoy was a little shocked, but he was happy to debunk the idea that he hated Star Trek. The ink was quickly dried on the contract and he took over the reins. He would of course direct the following film as well, The Voyage Home, which performed so well that Paramount decided to attempt another live-action series. Now, if only that had taken off, who knows what Star Trek might have become. Number 3. LeVar Burton. LeVar Burton made his directorial debut with Second Chances, working title, Too Many Rikers. He recalled that, it being so effect-heavy, it was a real baptism of fire. The show worked brilliantly, not least for how it handled both Rikers, but also in Burton's chance to cast Dr. Mae Jemison in the cameo role. Dr. Jemison was the first female African-American in space, something to which she credited Nichelle Nichols. Burton invited Nichols to set during filming, leading to what he called magic. From this, Burton would go on to direct another 28 episodes of Star Trek, including many of the Klingon-centric ones. J.G. Hertzler recalled being especially pleased that, in the Burton-directed Soldiers of the Empire, he was given a zoom-in, engage shot, something guest performers rarely got to experience in Star Trek. Burton would cameo in one of his own episodes, namely Timeless, Voyager's 100th episode. It took a little convincing at that point, but it made for a special moment for fans of the franchise. His final credit, to date, is the first part of Star Trek Enterprise's de facto finale, Demons. Number 2. Roxanne Dawson. Roxanne Dawson may be best known these days as a director. She's certainly prolific in her body of work, including on Apple TV's Foundation series. However, it was back in Voyager's 6th season episode Riddles wherein she got her start behind the camera. She recalled directing the episode as both a challenge but a wonderful experience. She was helped by her existing relationship with her co-stars, and she credits Marvin Rush, the director of photography, as to helping to truly create her vision. She later laughed that, as she has become more experienced, she may have made many different choices, so she was glad to go into that episode green. Dawson would go on to direct many episodes of Star Trek Enterprise as well, while also lending her voice to the chilling repair station in Dead Stop. Number 1. Jonathan Frakes. Jonathan Frakes is perhaps the best known actor turned director in Star Trek. He began his directing career with The Offspring from The Next Generation's 3rd season, and has directed episodes in almost every iteration of the franchise ever since. His work on First Contact and Insurrection had audiences hoping he would direct some more of the films, though this has yet to come to fruition. The running joke for the actor-director is that he gets things done, leading to the nickname Two Takes Frakes. In an industry where every second costs money, that's no mean feat. He was the first legacy actor to return to Star Trek, technically, when he directed Discovery. His appearance in Picard's first season, along with Marina Sirtis, marked his return to live-action acting after years away from being in front of the camera. Frakes is a fan favourite when it comes to directing, which has led for cries to give him an EP role in the franchise as well. Whether this happens or not, he certainly seems to be one of, if not the, go-to alumni when it comes to directing Star Trek. Now, if we can just get that damn Legacy show confirmed, let's see how many of those episodes we can ask him to direct as well.
For fans, Star Trek borders on the sacred, so reactions are reliably strong when it tackles the profane. Whether you think the latest evolution in the use of lively language is effing cool, or that it's the worst thing to happen to Trek since Shatner set out to Sharkari, swearing, stronger and stronger at that, is part of the franchise and warrants a discussion. With the amount of effing and jeffing I'm about to say, expect more beeps than Captain Pike's wheelchair. With all that being said, I'm Tom Roberts-Finn for TrekCulture, here with 10 shocking moments Star Trek used profanity. Number 10. Hell. Whilst a fairly innocuous word these days, getting hell into Star Trek took, well, a hell of an effort. For the Season 1 episode of the original series, The City on the Edge of Forever, the studio strongly objected to the last line as spoken by Captain Kirk, "Let's get the hell out of here." With NBC wanting the line removed, both Gene Roddenberry and William Shatner had to convince executives that nothing but hell could close the episode, and they relented. For what is most certainly one of the greatest Star Trek episodes, one heck of an ending would have not cut it. The word hell had been said in TOS before The City on the Edge of Forever, but not as an expletive. In Space Seed, Kirk uses the word when he quotes the line from Milton's Paradise Lost, "It is better to rule in hell than serve in heaven." In another Season 1 episode, The Alternative Factor, Lazarus cries out to Kirk, "I'll chase you to the very fires of hell." If the alternative is having to rewatch The Alternative Factor, I'll see you down there soon, Lazarus. Since then, there have been so many hells in Star Trek, even the Mother Mary has given up blushing. Number 9. Damn. You're familiar with the Good Doctor's line, "Damn it, Jim." Bones said that a lot in the original series, right? Well, not to get all Mandela effect on you, but you've been punked. There's a camera there's a camera there, etc. In truth, DeForest Kelley only ever said the line once to Kirk in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. "Damn it, Jim, what the hell's the matter with you? Other people have birthdays." Presumably, they'd already gone through enough hell on TOS to be damned by the FCC. Besides, he's a doctor, not a swear jar. Furthermore, it was not until Star Trek Into Darkness that Carl Urban's incarnation of the character added the famous "I'm a doctor, not a" after the line, "Damn it, Jim." Star Trek 2 wasn't done with the damns either. We got one from Savick and another "damn it" plus a goddamn from Bones in Kirk's apartment. Later, there's a "damned peculiar" from Kirk with regards to the recently requisitioned Reliant, and a few extra damns are sprinkled throughout the rest of the movie for good measure. When it comes to the other TV series, they've all given damn a damn good go. It is Captain Janeway, however, who undoubtedly gave us more of the finest examples of the lighter profanities. Stopped by a nebula? Damned if she will. Species 8472 are back in our galaxy. They'd better give her a damn good explanation. Delta Flyer doesn't win the race? Well, you get the idea. In any case, by today's streaming standards, all these dams seem positively tame. Number 8. Bloody. Given that traditionally the American usage of the word tends not to be an expletive, bloody comes up as such in the original series standout episode The Devil in the Dark. As Kirk lines up his red shirts to prepare to go hunting the misunderstood Mother Horta, he insists that he wants no more deaths, to which Chief Engineer Vanderberg, head of the Janus 6 mining colony, replies, "Except the bloody thing." It is a TOS legend who teaches the computer a bloody thing or two in the Next Generation episode Relics, when he goes to summon up a recreation of the Enterprise bridge, NCC 1701, no bloody A, B, C or D. Scotty, after a few Aldebaran whiskies, also gives us a masterclass in how to end a holodeck program that could save many the misfortune of a malfunction. Simply say, "Computer, shut this bloody thing off," and you'll never be trapped with the Practical Joker, Dixon Hill, Moriarty, Fistful of Datas, that Beowulf one, or in Fair Haven ever again. Number 7. Arse. Or ass. Let's get right to the bottom of things. The word arse, or ass, has been a Star Trek staple ever since Scotty called Harry Mudd a jackass in Mudd's Women. Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, gave us the double dumbass, and in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, Kirk wants to knock Spock on his goddamn ass. In Encounter at Farpoint, Picard's notorious nervousness around all those little rascals on the Enterprise D had him practically ordering Riker to stop him making an ass of himself with children. It's Captain Philippa Louvois who really sizes up Jean-Luc in The Measure of a Man when she says, "It brings a sense of order and stability to my universe to know that you're still a pompous ass and a damn sexy man," which is a line that never fails to make me cringe. Number 6. Piss. To quote head of the channel Chris, growing up in the UK would still get you a clip round the ear, despite "You really piss me off, Jim" getting the British Board of Film Classification approval for a PG rating for Star Trek V The Final Frontier. It is Dr. McCoy who is riled up enough to swear at his off-duty captain's crazy stunt and cavalier attitude to life in Star Trek V. The profanity almost seems pedestrian to contemporary ears, but it, and the expletives in the TOS era movies more generally, did loosen up the language for what we would later see down the line. Sensibilities have changed amongst the public and film classification boards alike. Today, it is the PG-13 rating that draws the biggest crowds in the US. Piss is used in the franchise in another sense in the Star Trek Picard Season 1 episode Broken Pieces. Cristobal Rios, not much in the mood to be a social butterfly, tells a worried Raffi who offers some company to piss off. Pissing off is Raffi's understanding reply. Number 5. Bastard. It is one of the best bits of dialogue in an otherwise run-of-the-mill movie, and it happens to feature a swear. We get the feeling that the de-bearded Riker was holding back another profanity or two when he outlined his Metreon gas maneuver to shove it down the sonar's throat, and to reuse a curse word from earlier, flying the Enterprise E by joystick is bloody cool. Without a doubt, the other most memorable, although tonally quadrants apart, use of the word bastard in Trek comes from Star Trek III The Search for Spock. When Savick reports back to the Enterprise from the Genesis planet that David is dead, Admiral Kirk is understandably unable to contain his emotions. He stumbles backwards, never quite making it to the command chair. "You Klingon bastards, you killed my son." I myself have been known to use the odd profanity when speaking about the Klingons. Usually it goes like this: "Oh, not another bastard Klingon episode, they're always so boring." Or something along those lines. Number 4. Bitch, bollocks, feck and frick. The 23rd century was a very different time. It made for a different breed of officer, who'd be booted out of Starfleet of the 24th century, as Captain Janeway once noted, although not without a degree of irony. Scotty wasn't reprimanded then, when he speculated about slaying Chancellor Gorkin's daughter, Azed Burr. "I bet the Klingon bitch killed her father." That accent was almost as good as his. There have been several other incidents of the word bitch in Star Trek, both on its own and in its variant son of a. The most humorous of which is one where it is not said at all. What does it mean, arrogant son of a? future barbecue enthusiast Rene Picard starts to ask in the Next Generation episode Family, before being promptly cut off by his uncle. Of course, it could only really have been Chief O'Brien who gave us bollocks. In Time's Orphan, a Deep Space Nine episode that was originally stated as a way to kill off Worf's son Alexander, O'Brien becomes increasingly frustrated with the state of his repairs and lets slip his testicular term. Whilst not likely to shock American ears, bollocks is a bit more problematic for UK and Irish audiences pre-Watershed. In fact, the BBC cut the word when the episode first aired, although somewhat strangely Irish broadcaster RTE apparently kept it in. Sticking with the Irish, no, not him. Actress Orla Brady was responsible for the inclusion in Star Trek of one of the most delightful swear words in the English language. In an episode of Picard that bludgeons us over the head with another F word, to be discussed later, the character of Laris was originally scripted to say, "Those sneaky bastards," regarding the shady Zat Vash. As for Frick, that comes from Ensign Mariner in the Lower Decks episode Keishon His Eyes Open, when she asks Collector Siggy, "You couldn't lend a frickin' tentacle." Number 3. With or without an emotion chip fused to your brain, wouldn't you be swearing like a Starship Trooper if you were hurtling down towards Viridian 3 in the saucer section? The android's "oh shit" remains one of the most memorable moments in the Star Trek generations. Until that point, Data couldn't muster up a contraction, let alone a curse word. The sudden swear was therefore so gloriously out of character that no other could have uttered it to such a hilarious effect. As our own Jack Pooley noted, the synth-startled S-bomb was included in the first place to bump up the film's street cred and box office saleability, from a G to PG rating in the Motion Pictures Association rating system. There have been a few more direct examples of the S-word since generations, as well as some creative variations on the theme both before and after. The award for funniest usage goes to Kirk's reply to Dr. Gillian Taylor in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home. "No ma'am, no dipshit." Admiral Picard gets second prize for best peace-offering profanity to Captain Shaw in Star Trek Picard Season 3's no-win scenario, despite the fact that you are indeed a dipshit from Chicago. Shaw also gets a knowing nod for his cursing creativity in the episode 17 Seconds. Anyone else want to throw more weird shit at me? Other than the dipshit, we've had bullshit in Star Trek First Contact, horse in Star Trek Beyond, and there was a storm until shit fan in Star Trek Discovery, to name but a few. Number 2. The very first episode of Star Trek to include the F-word was Choose Your Pain. During a discussion about how they might stop using Ripper the tardigrade as the mycelial network's designated driver, it's Tilly who drops Star Trek's first F-bomb when she says, "This is so cool." Tilly promptly apologizes, but Stamets giddily replies, "No, cadet, it is cool." The use of the expletive had some fans up in arms. In response to the criticism at the time, in an interview with the AV Club, Discovery co-executive producer Aaron Harbetz explained that the first F-word of the franchise was included because we are streaming, so we could do whatever we want. It was in the context of 3 scientists having a victory and celebrating. It was sort of like Nerds Unite. They kicked ass and dropped a few F-bombs. Nevertheless, some found the sudden addition of such strong language in Trek to be rather jarring. The F-word seemed out of place for the usually more mild-mannered characters of a franchise that have never gone boldly beyond PG-13. Also, in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, one of the 20th century garbage men at the Golden Gate Park was originally scripted to say, "What the f*** was that?" The swear was downgraded to hell in the final version. Since Tilly, Stamets, and the tardigrade, the 4-letter words have continued to flourish. Number 1. Sadly for me, there has been no use of the word in Star Trek, so here we are with further The second time anyone dared use the word in Trek was to Picard, in his very own series no less. We all know the Admiral Clancy line by now. It was certainly a shock to hear the esteemed captain, now retired Admiral, Picard being addressed in such a manner. Within the context of the events of the episode, Clancy might well have had a point. There was a certain arrogance to Picard's request. Patrick Stewart was, at least at first, taken aback by the profanity in Picard, as he told TV Guide. When I came across the first swear word in the first script, I can honestly tell you I was deeply shocked. It was something that had never been a part of previous Star Trek. He did concede that times have changed, however, and to continue to make the world a better place in the way that Next Generation sought to do, Star Trek Picard would have to change along with them. By the time Season 3 came along, Stewart wasn't at all as trepidatious, even throwing in an improvised bit of foul-mouthery in the episode No Win Scenario during the scene with Jack Crusher on the holodeck. 10 grueling hours, Picard says. The little shuttle-escaped F-bomb caused as much backlash as you might expect, but showrunner Terry Matalas defended Stewart's off-color ad-lib, having initially been thrown by it himself, as a moment of authenticity between father and son. For better or for worse, because writers and producers are no longer working under the rules of broadcast television, there really has been quite a lot of effing and blinding in Star Trek Picard. As well as the above, we had the likes of I Hate That Hospitality hologram in Season 1's Absolute Candor, and Shut the Up in Broken Pieces, and Clone Their Cats in Season 2's Fly Me to the Moon.